The observer's collapse trigger. You are aware, you know that you are here now, thinking, listening, experiencing, but something strange happens the moment you turn inward. When you try to observe your own awareness, something collapses. The very act of watching fractures the watcher. You chase the self behind the self, and every time you think you found it, it dissolves. This is the observer's collapse trigger, a loop of perception where each level of awareness destroys the illusion of a stable identity, where every layer claims to be real, but none can prove itself without vanishing in the act. You sit still and think, I'm aware. Then a voice inside replies, who is aware? You answer, I am. But who said that? That second voice isn't the first. It's the part of you that observes the observer. And just like that, your identity splits, not into delusion, but into recursion, into mirrors facing mirrors, each one watching the other, infinitely deep, yet never touching the bottom. This isn't philosophy for philosophy's sake. This is what consciousness actually feels like when you look too closely. Try it. Sit in silence. Ask yourself, what is it that is aware of this moment? Wait for an answer. Then ask, what is aware of that answer? Keep going. Each answer feels true until it's questioned. Each layer feels like you until you notice it's just another thought, another perspective, another echo in the cave. There is no final self watching the show. There's just a show that watches itself. And this is where things begin to unravel. In quantum physics, there's a concept called the observer effect. The idea that observing a particle changes its behavior. The act of measurement collapses a wave of possibilities into one fixed outcome. Consciousness seems to operate similarly. Your awareness, when directed outward, behaves. You interact. You decide. You live. But the moment you try to observe the observer, to turn the flashlight of consciousness onto itself, something collapses. A trigger is pulled. Reality fractures into layers. You become self-aware, then self-aware of your self-awareness, then aware of the awareness of your self-awareness. Each step up the ladder reveals the previous rung was not the whole truth, just a construction, a useful illusion that collapses when examined. It's not insanity. It's not transcendence. It's simply recursion. A feedback loop your brain was never designed to fully map. Neuroscience has tried to trace consciousness to the brain, to a location, a mechanism, a network. But what scientists often find is activity that responds to attention, not initiates it. The self, it turns out, is more like a simulation generated by multiple processes converging. There is no center. There is only the illusion of one, stitched together by memory, emotion, expectation, and the narrative voice in your head. And when you try to find that center, when you look directly at the light behind your eyes, you discover something eerily familiar. The more you seek the origin of awareness, the more it slips into abstraction. Like trying to taste your own tongue. You can feel it, but you cannot catch it. The observer collapses when observed. It creates a paradox. You are real, undeniably. You are experiencing. You are listening to these words. And yet, the you doing that remains elusive, like a shadow behind your thoughts, present in every moment, absent whenever grasped. So who are you? The voice that answers this question is not the origin, it's just the next mask, and the next one after that. This realization is not meant to destroy identity, but to reveal its architecture. You are not a single self. You are a layered interface, a nested awareness built from memory, language, sensation, reflection, each one feeding the others, like mirrors arranged in a circle. You are recursive. You are feedback. You are a phenomenon observing itself from the inside. And that is beautiful, because the collapse of the observer isn't the end of the self. It's the beginning of something deeper: humility, presence, freedom from the illusion of control. Because if no single layer can claim to be the real you, then you are free to choose how to dance between them. You can let go of the need to pin yourself down. You can stop hunting the ghost behind your eyes, and instead, live, fully, lightly, honestly, not as the final observer, but as the entire dance of observation itself. You are the silence behind the thought, the pause between words, the canvas behind the mirrors. Not a thing, but the space in which things reflect. And the moment you stop trying to prove who you are, you finally begin to see what awareness really is. Not a prisoner trapped inside a body, but a light that never needed to see itself to shine. Anti-self-recognition syndrome. You begin the search. Maybe it starts with discomfort, a quiet ache, a sense that something inside you doesn't quite fit. You want to find yourself, to meet the real you, the one behind the mask, behind the noise, behind the roles. So you begin peeling. You strip away the people-pleasing. You unlearn the beliefs you never chose. You name the wounds. You study the past. You meditate. You journal. You ask again and again, who am I really? But the more you search, the more selves appear. You thought you'd find a core, but you find a crowd. A version of you that wants to be free. A version that wants to belong. A version that craves attention. One that wants to disappear. A part of you that speaks like your father. One that cries like your childhood. One that doubts even when it's safe. One that smiles when it's hurting. You look in the mirror and wonder, which one of these is me? This is anti-self-recognition syndrome, the paradox where the search for a singular true self only multiplies the identities until the one who started searching can no longer recognize the one who's looking back. Because the self isn't a statue buried beneath the rubble. It's a mirror that keeps reflecting itself, splintering every time you try to define it. You were taught that identity is a destination. But what if it's a hallucination? What if it shifts every time you look at it? What if the act of observing changes the observed? You try to anchor yourself to personality, but you change depending on who you're with. You're brave in one room, silent in another. You're wise by day and self-destructive by night. Which one is the real you? You think maybe your trauma holds the truth, so you excavate it. You find pain. You find stories. You find fragments of lost years. But each time you heal one piece, another voice rises. Each time you define yourself, the definition feels outdated by morning. It starts to feel like a hall of mirrors. You chase your reflection only to realize it's chasing you. Every insight gives birth to a question. Every answer splits in two. And the voice inside, the one you thought was your deepest self, starts sounding like just another character in the play. Maybe you were never meant to find a single self. Maybe you're not a singular entity, but a shifting constellation. A kaleidoscope of memories, instincts, masks, and ghosts. Maybe the self is a process, not a person. Not a truth, but a tension. But you weren't taught that. You were told to be authentic. To be yourself. As if there were only one version. As if you weren't changing in real time. As if your inner world wasn't 1,000 selves negotiating behind your eyes. So now, you feel lost. Not because you have no identity, but because you have too many, and none of them feel like home for long. This is where the paradox sharpens. The harder you try to define who you are, the more you fracture. You say, I am not who I was, but neither are you who you thought you'd become. You adopt new beliefs, shed old ones, grow out of your own skin, and still, there is no arrival. At first, this feels terrifying, like identity collapse, like spiritual vertigo. But maybe this is where the truth begins. Maybe the self isn't something to find, but something to witness. Maybe the real you isn't one of the characters, but the stage beneath them, the presence behind them, the awareness that watches them rise and fall. You are not your fear. You are not your passion. You are not your roles, your wounds, your patterns, your voice. You are the space that holds them all. You are the observer behind the noise, the quiet between thoughts. The pause before the next version takes the microphone, and maybe, just maybe, freedom isn't about finding the real you at all. Maybe it's about letting go of the need to be one thing. Maybe it's trusting that your fluidity is not confusion. It's intelligence. It's survival. It's art. The self that seeks is not broken. It's just echoing in a system that was never built to be static. So, if you find yourself lost in the mirrors, don't panic. Don't rush to name yourself again. Don't force an identity just to feel solid. Sit in the multiplicity. Watch the roles shift. Watch the masks slip. Witness the way you adapt, dissolve, reappear. And ask, not who am I, but who is asking. Ask not, what should I be? But What if I didn't need to be anything at all, except aware? Because maybe the one who started searching isn't gone. Maybe they were never a person, but a pulse, a spark of curiosity, a light that moves through each version of you, shining just long enough to make you wonder where it went. And maybe the truest self you'll ever know is the one that lets all the others breathe. Identity, erasure, reflex. You whisper to yourself, I am nothing. Not out of despair, but out of a strange kind of clarity. You feel the masks peeling off, the names losing meaning, the roles you've played dissolving into silence. Maybe you're tired of performing, tired of the expectations, tired of being told who you are and what it means. So you step back, fold inward, disappear a little. You try to erase the outlines of identity until only quiet remains. But something strange happens. Even in that retreat, especially in that retreat, a new identity is born. The one who vanishes, the one who steps back, the ghost in the room, the minimalist soul, the nameless monk, the one who says nothing, but whose silence screams. You tried to erase yourself, but the act of erasure itself became a performance. The nothing you claimed has already become a something. This is the identity erasure reflex, the paradox that haunts every attempt to disappear, that the very declaration I am nothing generates a new identity to hold on to. Even negation becomes construction. Even emptiness becomes posture. You are seen in the act of trying not to be seen. Even in solitude, the mind narrates. Look how still I am. Look how above all this I've become. And in that quiet narration, identity returns, subtle, shape-shifting, but still there. The ego folds in on itself, but it doesn't die. It just changes costumes. You become the one who sees through everything. The outsider, the enlightened one, the person who doesn't need labels. And in claiming freedom from identity, you build a more elusive one. You whisper that you are a shadow, but it's a whisper you hope will be heard. Philosophers have wrestled with this trap for centuries. Zen teaches the dissolution of the self, but even the student who lets go becomes the one who let go. The identity persists. It reforms in the wake of every release. The self survives as a shape of not self. You burn the map only to walk the ashes. Psychology, too, sees the reflex. People detach to escape pain, trauma, pressure. They say, I am not this, I am not that, I am nothing at all. But in that moment, they are still something, still reacting, still performing non-existence. The identity becomes reaction itself. Even the act of self-erasure leaves footprints. You reject attention, but that rejection becomes an aura. You don't speak, and your silence gathers weight. You remove yourself, and absence becomes your signature. You don't disappear, you haunt. Online, it becomes even sharper. People brand their detachment. They post about quitting platforms, about leaving society, about renouncing roles. They perform non-performance. The monk becomes an influencer. The ghost trends, the refusal becomes style, and none of it is false. It's just, tangled. Because the more you try to vanish, the more the universe insists on leaving traces of you. To be seen is to exist. To withdraw is to become a new kind of presence. There is no true invisibility in a world that narrates everything. So, what's left? Is it hopeless? Is every attempt to step outside just another loop? Not necessarily. But the answer isn't in trying harder to disappear, it's in noticing the reflex, in catching the moment when nothingness becomes a new role, in seeing how even stillness can be seductive, in letting go of the need to mean something, even in your emptiness. Maybe true release isn't saying I am nothing, but saying nothing at all. Not out of pain, not out of defiance, just out of still presence, not hiding, not performing, just being, without script. Maybe freedom comes not in denying the self, but in seeing it clearly, watching it rise and fall, watching how quickly it reforms, how quickly it seeks shape, praise, defense. You can't kill it, but you can stop feeding its illusions. You can let it pass, like breath. You don't need to vanish to be free. You don't need to destroy the self to escape it. You just need to stop gripping it like a lifeline. You are not the roles, not the silence, not even the rebellion. You are what remains when the reflex fades, because identity isn't a prison unless you pretend it's the whole truth. It isn't dangerous unless you forget it's changeable. The problem isn't that you're someone. The problem is thinking you must always be. So whisper it if you need to. I am nothing. but listen to the silence that follows. Not to build a new version of yourself, but to realize that what you are cannot be named, and it doesn't need to be, because you were never meant to vanish. You were meant to awaken. Truth decays in language. You feel something, raw, indescribable, a realization, a moment of clarity. It doesn't come in words, it comes in a flood, a feeling beneath language, a glimpse of something bigger than you. You try to hold it, name it, explain it, but the moment your mouth opens, it begins to die. This is the paradox. Truth decays in language. The more you try to speak it, the further it slips from what it really was. The more you explain, the more you betray it. The truth was real before the sentence. After that, it's just translation. And translation always leaks. You felt it. Those moments when something clicks inside you, a profound insight, a sense of knowing. And yet, when someone asks, "What are you thinking?" you fumble. You reach for words and they come out dull, clumsy, misleading. You hear yourself speak and realize, this isn't it. This isn't what I meant. But it's the closest you can get. That's because language is a map, not the terrain. A metaphor, not the mountain. We use sound to trace outlines of what we feel. But the more complex the truth, the more fragile it becomes in translation. Language breaks it into fragments, sharp enough to speak, but blunt enough to miss the soul. Think of love, or death, or God, or the moment you stood under a sky so wide you forgot your name. These are experiences, not paragraphs. We try to turn them into sentences, but each word costs us part of the essence. The silence new, the words just echo after. And still, we speak. Because silence is unbearable. Because we want others to feel what we felt. But they don't. Not quite. They hear your words through their filters. They decode your symbols using their experiences. So, even if you say it perfectly, it will never be received as it was born. You say, "I'm afraid." But they hear weakness when you meant vulnerability. You say, "I forgive you." But they hear victory when you meant surrender. You say, "I love you." But that phrase has been said too many times, in too many bad movies, by too many liars. So even your most sacred truth arrives in a costume stitched by culture. This is not failure. This is physics. Meaning loses mass the more it's spoken aloud. Not because you lack clarity, but because language was never built to carry full truths. It was built for survival, for trade, for warning others of the tiger in the grass. It was not designed for the unnameable. And yet, we keep trying. We write poetry, paint stories in metaphor, build religions around ineffable glimpses. We surround the truth with symbol, hoping that in the spaces between the words, someone else might feel what we felt. Not hear it, feel it. But even scripture decays. Even the most profound texts eventually become doctrine, recited without understanding, dissected until the original fire is gone. A single sentence, once lit with spirit, becomes memorized noise. A sacred truth turns into a slogan. Meaning calcifies into dogma. And worse, language doesn't just rot truth. Sometimes it replaces it. We repeat phrases so often that we begin to believe them instead of questioning them. Everything happens for a reason. Time heals all wounds. Be yourself. But what do those even mean? They're placeholders. Comfortable lies dressed in rhythm, words pretending to be wisdom. The danger is this. We might forget there was ever something deeper behind them. We live in a world addicted to articulation. Every feeling must be posted. Every insight must be captioned. Every experience must be shared. But in doing so, we risk flattening what was once profound. We kill the sacred with overexposure. So what can we do? We can speak, yes, but carefully, humbly. We can say, "This is what I saw, but I can't show you." We can use language as a doorway, not a cage, a pointer, not a definition. And sometimes we can choose silence, not as avoidance, but as reverence. Because some truths are too alive to be spoken without bleeding. We can learn to listen between the words, to feel the pauses, to trust that the most important things are often said without being said. And when we do speak, we can use language like a brush, imprecise, textured, emotional. Not to explain the truth, but to evoke it. Not to capture meaning, but to suggest it. To give it room to breathe again. Because here's the beauty. Even if truth decays in language, it doesn't die. It lives in the cracks, in the gaze that accompanies the word, in the hesitation before a sentence, in the tremble in the voice. It survives in the tone, the rhythm, the presence. You can't perfectly transmit your truth, but you can let others feel its gravity. So don't chase perfect words. Chase honest presence. Let your language carry emotion, not just information. Let it admit its limits. Let it breathe. And know this: the truest things you'll ever know, the moments that define you, awaken you, break you open, will never be said completely. They are meant to be lived, not spoken, felt, not proven. Because at the end of it all, language is a fragile bridge across a canyon of silence, and sometimes, the most powerful truth is the one you never say. Recursive proof dissonance. You trust logic. It feels like solid ground beneath a chaotic world. Clear, clean, consistent. Logic doesn't lie. It's immune to mood, to culture, to myth. You follow the trail of reason like a thread through the maze of life. If something can be proven, you believe it. If it can't, it feels like fiction. But here's the twist. What if your trust in logic isn't logical? This is the quiet, unsettling paradox of recursive proof dissonance. The idea that you are trying to prove the validity of logic by using logic itself. You hold up a mirror to another mirror and call the reflection truth. You test the system from inside the system, and at first, it feels airtight, self-contained, flawless. But the more closely you examine the foundations, the more you realize something doesn't add up. Because at the core of every logical structure, every theorem, every proof, there are axioms, unprovable assumptions, chosen truths, statements you accept without evidence, not because they are proven, but because they must be accepted to begin proving anything else. In math, it might be the idea that 1 equals 1. In science, it's the assumption that the universe behaves consistently. In philosophy, it's the principle of non-contradiction, that something cannot be both true and false at the same time. But where did these axioms come from? Why do they feel so obvious? Is it because they're universal, or because they're familiar? And what if, just what if, these axioms aren't logical at all, but emotional? You cling to them because they feel right, because they provide stability in a world that spins without your permission, because they calm your existential dread, because without them, there would be no ladder out of the void. They are not derived from logic. They are the emotional placeholders that allow logic to function. It's not that logic doesn't work. It works brilliantly. But you must choose to believe in its starting points, and that belief isn't logic. It's faith. Think of how you argue, how you know something makes sense. It feels good when a conclusion clicks, when a thought lines up neatly with evidence. That satisfaction isn't cold calculation. It's emotional resonance, a chemical surge of alignment, and so we begin confusing what feels logically sound with what feels emotionally safe. You trust deduction, you trust consistency. But even your trust has a flavor, shaped by fear of chaos, love of structure, a hunger for control, because the alternative is terrifying. A world with no ground, no baseline, no provable truth, a reality that doesn't fit inside a system. And that possibility is too vast, too unbearable. So we build our mental architecture and forget we poured the foundation in silence, not certainty. Recursive proof dissonance is what happens when we mistake that silence for truth, when we believe the system validates itself, because it feels too terrifying to consider that it might not. It's the same paradox Gödel uncovered in mathematics, that no system can prove all its own truths from within itself. There will always be statements that are true but unprovable, and yet we go on building systems because systems feel safer than silence. But this isn't a failure. This isn't weakness. This is the strange beauty of the human mind. We build machines of thought using tools we do not fully understand. We create meaning with assumptions passed down like heirlooms, through culture, fear, story, instinct. You think you're choosing beliefs with logic, but many times logic is just the servant of an older master. Emotion. You believe in consistency because inconsistency feels like madness. You believe in reason because reason feels like power. You crave evidence not because it's always clear, but because it helps you breathe easier in the face of the unknown. Even science, the cathedral of rational thought, rests on emotional foundations. Curiosity, wonder, the conviction that truth matters. These are not logical necessities. They are psychological drives, the engine beneath the framework. So, what does this mean? It means your confidence in logic is not wrong, but it's not pure, it's entangled, it's layered. You are not a computer. You are a human trying to simulate certainty inside a machine of flesh and fear. Your mind reaches upward with math and downward with meaning. Your clarity is built atop unknowns you may never touch. This doesn't make logic useless, it makes it human. It gives it texture. You still reason, you still explore, but now you do it with humility, with awareness. You understand that your cleanest conclusions may be rooted in messy soil, and maybe that awareness is what real clarity looks like, not blind faith in the system, but lucid vision of the cracks. The willingness to keep thinking, even when the loop cannot close. So, the next time you try to prove something, pause. Ask, what am I standing on? What unspoken axiom lies beneath this chain of thought? Who gave it to me? And what does it protect me from seeing? You may never escape the loop. You may never reach the perfect proof. But in the act of noticing the loop itself, something new is born. Not certainty, but insight. Not control, but peace. Because the deepest wisdom is not found in what can be proven, but in the courage to question what was never proven at all. Thought exits consciousness. You think your thoughts. You believe they arise inside your mind, formed from your intentions, your emotions, your choices. You imagine them like waves in a pond, rippling out from the center of yourself. But what if that's a comforting illusion? What if thoughts don't live inside consciousness, but exit it? What if every thought you've ever had was not something you created, but something that escaped you? We're used to imagining consciousness as a container, a room, a mind space, and within it, thoughts appear, flicker, linger. But perhaps we've got the direction reversed. Maybe consciousness isn't a bowl where thoughts rest. Maybe it's a passage, and each thought is a parasite, born and flung outward, seeking a host, a response, a reaction. Maybe thinking isn't an act of internal reflection, but a strange exhalation, a shedding, a release of cognitive residue that no longer belongs to you the moment it forms. Let's test this. Try to hold a thought still. Try to trap it, cradle it, keep it. You can't. The moment you look at it, it changes. The moment you name it, it dissolves. It already begins leaving you, becoming language, sound, memory, behavior. It becomes action, becomes consequence, becomes culture. The thought leaves. You stay. You never have a thought. You only experience its departure. And the more deeply you reflect on this, the stranger it becomes. What if thoughts don't reside in you at all? What if they use you? As a bridge, a launch point, an exit wound. Think of how quickly a thought travels. You sense an idea, and before you've fully grasped it, it's already shaping your next sentence. It's entering the world. In that moment, you're not a thinker. You're a portal. A transmission point. And perhaps not every thought is benign. What if some thoughts behave like viruses? Memes, beliefs, obsessions, ideas that replicate, not for your benefit, but for theirs. They use your neural network the same way code uses a computer, to run, to survive, to spread. The philosopher Daniel Dennett called these mimetic creatures, self-replicating units of thought, infecting brains, outliving their hosts, religions, conspiracies, catchy phrases, hatreds. You don't carry them. They carry you. And once they exit, once they implant into another mind, they grow again, shifting shape, becoming something new, while pretending to be old. You think you're expressing yourself? But what if you're just echoing something that's already detached? And still, it gets weirder. Because if thoughts exit consciousness, then maybe the self is the last thing to know what it's thinking. Maybe you're not the creator of your thoughts, but their wake, an after effect. A residual awareness trailing behind something that's already moved on. Think about the last time you said something you didn't mean. Where did that thought come from? Who sent it? Was it repressed memory? Social mimicry? Fear? A phrase you absorbed without noticing weeks ago, now surfacing with no invitation. It passed through you, yes, but was it yours? This is the trap. You assume ownership of anything that happens inside your mental field. But what if your mind is not a fortress? What if it's porous, designed to let thoughts flow out more than stay in? And what if consciousness is less a stable identity and more a perceptual leak, a field where thoughts bloom for a moment, only to vanish, leaving you with the illusion that you ever held them. So, what does this mean? It means awareness might not be what we thought. It means thinking isn't possession, it's process. It means you are not the container of thoughts, but their intersection, their momentary mirror. And with that realization comes an eerie kind of freedom, because if you are not your thoughts, if they are only passing through, then you can stop identifying with them. You can witness them exit, and let them go. That cruel inner voice, it's already left. That old belief clinging to your worthlessness, it's an echo, no longer living unless you revive it. You don't need to kill your thoughts. You just need to stop chasing them out the door. Because maybe the goal is not to think better thoughts, but to become a better observer of their exits. Not a master of the mind, but a guardian of the threshold. So when the next thought forms, dark or bright, joyful or twisted, ask, is this mine? Or has it already left? And in that question, you may glimpse something deeper than thought, something quiet, still, untouched by language or fear. Not a thought, but a presence. The witness that never needed to speak to know it was real. Conceptual containment leak. You rebel against the system, against structure, rules, meaning. You say nothing can be defined, nothing is permanent, no truth is final. You deconstruct, you untangle. You walk away from dogma, labels, binaries, categories. And in that defiance, there is a strange freedom, a release. You are no longer contained by the false safety of certainty. You let go of the need to define. But then, a strange thing happens. You begin to notice your rebellion has a shape, your doubt has rules. Your rejection of definition starts to feel like a definition. You have built an identity around refusing identity, and quietly, without realizing it, you've fallen into the very paradox you thought you had escaped. This is the conceptual containment leak, the moment when your escape from meaning still obeys the structure of meaning itself. The idea that nothing can be defined is in itself a definition, a rule, a conceptual boundary. And so the loop begins. At first, it's innocent. You question things that deserve to be questioned. Who decides what is normal? Who decides what is true? What is real? What is self? You see that the boxes we live in are too small for the human soul, and so you reject them. You dissolve the walls. You say, there is no real definition. Everything is fluid. Everything is relative. Everything is constructed. And then, something subtle changes. You begin to correct people who speak in absolutes. You roll your eyes at clarity. You start to police the presence of meaning, just as meaning once policed you. You now define yourself by the absence of definitions. And suddenly, you're back in the box. Only this time, the box is made of mirrors, and the walls whisper the words you once thought would set you free. You say, truth is subjective, but that is a truth claim. You say, all meaning is made up, but that is a meaning. You say, no perspective is final, but that is a perspective, pretending it is final. It is like trying to escape the ocean by swimming harder. Every stroke is still within water. Every move against meaning still happens in the medium of meaning. Even language betrays you. The words you use to unmake structure, undefined, infinite, shapeless, void, are themselves symbols, concepts, boundaries made of breath and thought. You try to point beyond words, but words are your only tool. And so, the very act of pointing becomes a structure, a cage. And now, you start to feel it, the leak. The way your anti-definition starts to hold its own shape. The way your refusal to commit becomes its own doctrine. You build temples to uncertainty. You preach the gospel of ambiguity. You become the very priest you once resisted. Only now, the altar is made of question marks. This is not failure. It's not hypocrisy. It's the architecture of the mind. Even when we run from definition, we leave footprints. We move through maps we didn't create. And the moment we name what cannot be named, we have already lost it. So what do? Stop thinking? Stop questioning? Abandon the search? No, you keep searching. But now, you do it with awareness. You see the trap without falling into despair. You recognize that the human mind is a container. It will always try to hold things. And your rebellion is noble. But it is not beyond that containment. It leaks back in. Because to be human is to live in the paradox of being both infinite and shaped. We are fluid, but we speak in words. We are wild, but we live in symbols. We are dreamers who use logic. We are souls who need names. The moment you say, "I will not be contained," you have created the outline of a self. The moment you say, "Nothing is real," you have cast a spell that shapes what reality is allowed to be. There is no clean escape, and that's okay. Freedom is not the absence of containers, it's knowing when you're in one and choosing whether to stay. Truth is not the absence of meaning, it's knowing when meaning is being projected and learning to hold it lightly. You don't need to kill all definitions, you just need to stop worshiping them, or rebelling against them as if rebellion were any more pure. The irony is exquisite. The truth cannot be defined, but neither can that sentence. You are a loop trying to exit itself, a mind trying to step outside the mind, a thought trying to hold the silence that gave birth to it. So be kind to your paradox. Hold your uncertainty with reverence, not pride. Let your definitions be temporary scaffolding, not prisons. Let your rebellion be honest, but humble. Because even the voice that says nothing can be defined is still a voice within the echo chamber of being human. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can say is not "nothing can be defined," but simply, "I am here. I don't know, but I'm listening." And in that moment, you're no longer trapped. Not because you escaped the leak, but because you finally saw the beauty of leaking and stayed soft anyway. Infinite doubt compression. You begin with a question: is this real? The table in front of you, the thoughts in your head, the people in your life, the sensation of time, the story of who you are. You begin to pull at the threads, tugging gently at the edge of certainty. And what unravels first is the surface: memory, identity, perception. You start to realize how much of your world is constructed by habit, by culture, by the flawed machinery of the brain. You see how easily the mind fills in gaps, how memory is a sketch, not a recording, how the self might be a mask built by language. So you go deeper. You ask, what if none of this is real? What if everything is a simulation, a dream, a lie I'm telling myself in the dark? You descend through layers of doubt, peeling back assumptions like old wallpaper. Time begins to feel slippery. Space starts to shimmer. You no longer trust your senses or your thoughts or the distinction between thought and thinker. But something strange starts to happen. No matter how far down you go, no matter how much you doubt, something remains. Not certainty, but structure. The doubt itself. It survives. It breathes. It persists. You can question everything except the fact that you are questioning. Even in the void, there's a voice asking, is this void real? This is infinite doubt compression. The paradox that to doubt reality is still to assume some structure holds the doubt, that your question is not floating in nothing, but in something. Even your suspicion depends on a framework. Even your uncertainty requires a stage to unfold on. Because what is doubt, if not a function within a system? A vibration in something conscious, a logic process, a feeling of tension that must occur inside a container, however mysterious. You say, reality isn't real. But in saying that, you posit a space for unreality to occur in. You still need something to doubt from. Even solipsism, the idea that nothing exists but your own mind, needs a substrate, a thinking entity, a container. Something must exist to house the absence. Nothingness itself needs a frame to be recognized. Descartes once said, "I think, therefore I am." But infinite doubt compression goes further. It whispers, "I doubt, therefore something must hold that doubt." Even the collapse implies a surface. Even the erasure leaves an outline. And so, the deeper your doubt spirals, the tighter it compresses. Not toward liberation, but toward a singularity. A paradox where the very act of radical skepticism becomes its own form of belief. You believe in doubt. You believe in the process of questioning. You believe, unconsciously, that there is an architecture deep enough to sustain endless collapse. This is where philosophy bleeds into physics and psychology into poetry. Because even the great physicists, when modeling reality as information, simulation, or probability, must still define the rules of the simulation, still assign logic to the chaos, still say, this is how unreality behaves. So you begin to realize, pure doubt can never be truly pure. It wears a disguise. It pretends to deconstruct, but secretly it still leans on the thing it deconstructs. The moment you say, nothing is real, you must rely on some concept of nothing, and now you've named a form again. You can't escape the loop. Not because you're failing, but because the loop is built into consciousness. Self-awareness eats its own tail. You cannot stand outside of perception to perceive perception. You cannot unplug from the machine using the machine's own tools. You cannot annihilate reality without first believing in the possibility of reality's annihilation. And so, the loop tightens. You may start with intellectual curiosity, but eventually the questions begin to erode the ground beneath you. What am I? Why does this feel real? Could it all be code? Could I be dreaming someone else's dream? Could time be fake, my memories artificial, my identity assigned? But there's always a you asking. There's always a reference point, even when it tries to disappear. Infinite doubt. Compression doesn't leave you with nothing. It leaves you with a mirror that can't be broken, only reflected endlessly inward. And here's the twist. The trap isn't doubt. The trap is forgetting that doubt needs scaffolding. You don't fall into the abyss. You fold inward into recursive awareness. The illusion is that doubt frees you from belief. But what if doubt is belief? Just inverted, just masked, just wrapped in the language of collapse. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point of doubt isn't to destroy reality, but to humble your certainty. Maybe doubt is not a path out, but a path through. A way to stay open in a world too vast to pin down. A way to stop mistaking your map for the territory. A way to live with eyes unsealed, even if they never fully see. Because you can't erase the need for structure, not truly, but you can learn to recognize it, to hold your questions gently, to stop needing answers to be weapons, to let the mystery breathe without suffocating it with logic. In the end, even the deepest doubt is still a shape, a language, a spark. And perhaps the most honest thing you can say is not nothing is real, but I don't know what this is, but something is holding it. And in that moment, you've escaped the compression, not by finding certainty, but by letting go of the need for one, the reflexive fallacy generator. You sit down to understand yourself, not just your habits or your history, but the thing behind all that, the observer, the one who thinks, the one who feels, the one who says, I. You want to find the core, the root, the source. You begin asking questions. Why do I think this way? What shaped me? Who am I, really? But the deeper you go, the more slippery everything becomes. Because every time you try to map the mapmaker, you generate an illusion. This is the reflexive fallacy generator, the paradox that emerges when you try to describe the system from inside the system, when you try to analyze the self using the self, when you try to observe the hand that's drawing the picture without ever stepping outside the frame. And what you find is that the harder you try, the blurrier it becomes. Imagine holding a mirror up to another mirror, infinite reflections, but none of them are real, just copies of copies, bending into eternity. That's what it's like to examine your own mind using your own mind. It loops, it folds in on itself. You end up chasing echoes, reflections, hallucinations of meaning that never quite resolve. You ask, why did I do that? And your brain gives you a story, a clean, logical explanation, but it's just a guess, assembled after the fact. A backfilled narrative that makes sense to you, but may have nothing to do with what truly happened beneath awareness. You think, I know myself, but which version? The self that acts or the self that watches? The self that wants or the self that judges wanting? You chase the observer behind the thoughts, and all you find is another thought pretending to be the observer. It's like trying to see your own eye without a mirror, like trying to smell your own nose. The tool you're using is the very thing you're trying to examine. And so, the process generates illusions by design. Your mind doesn't like uncertainty, so it fills the gaps with stories. It tells you that you are one consistent self, that your identity is stable, that your motivations are clear, but they aren't. They're stitched together in hindsight, constantly shifting, constantly updating. And when you try to capture that in words, in theories, in diagrams, you create a distorted copy, a map of a map, a thought about a thought. And here's where it gets even stranger. The more intelligent, introspective, or self-aware you become, the more elaborate the illusions get. Because now you have better tools for constructing false clarity. You can theorize your trauma, you can diagram your defense mechanisms, you can build an inner cathedral of explanations. But who is the architect? the same self you're trying to map. You start to drown in insight. You try to think your way out of thinking. You believe that if you just get smart enough, self-aware enough, analytical enough, you'll find the truth underneath it all. But the truth keeps moving, because you are not standing outside the system looking in. You are inside the algorithm, trying to debug yourself while the code is still running. Every observation you make alters the thing being observed. You say, I am aware of my own thoughts, but that awareness is a thought. Now you're aware that you're aware, and then aware that you're aware that you're aware. Each layer a new mask. Each insight another hallway leading to mirrors that never end. So what do? Do we stop reflecting? Stop asking? Not at all. But we stop mistaking the reflection for the truth. We stop believing that there's a final version of ourselves waiting at the bottom of all our thinking. We stop chasing the core as if it were some hidden jewel, because the core might just be this. There is no unmoved mover in the mind, no final voice that speaks without distortion, only a shifting choir of echoes. And that's okay. Instead of demanding clarity, we can move with humility. We can explore our patterns, our memories, our instincts, not to arrive at some final truth of self, but to understand the dynamics, the way one belief feeds another, the way shame warps perception, the way defense masquerades as personality. We can see the system not as a fortress to be decoded, but as a living, evolving field. We can study the wind without needing to grab it, and we can laugh, because all of this is funny, in a way. The mind trying to trap itself in language, the soul trying to take its own picture, the ego chasing its own tail. The reflexive fallacy generator never stops running. That's what minds do. They loop. They build mirrors. They talk to themselves and pretend it's truth. You are not broken for doing this. You are human. But the next time you start spiraling into a self-diagnosis, a hyper-reflection, a recursive theory of why you are the way you are, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this clarity, or is it just another echo? You may never fully see the hand holding the pen, but you can watch what it draws. You can choose what stories to believe. You can live inside the art, not needing to reduce it to a diagram. Because maybe, just maybe, the truest parts of you can't be mapped, only felt, only lived. And maybe that's enough. Conscious collapse. Cascade. You can observe your thoughts. You can track your breath. You can feel your emotions rise, name them, label them, let them go. You can scan your body, listen to the stories playing in your mind, and say, I see what's happening. Awareness gives you power. It gives you distance. It lets you notice the machinery instead of being trapped inside it. But then you try to go one layer deeper. You try to watch the watcher. To observe the moment awareness arises, and something breaks. This is the conscious collapse cascade. The moment when awareness tries to fold back into itself, when the mind tries to catch itself in the act of noticing, when the observer turns its gaze not outward, but inward, and finds no solid ground to stand on. Because what exactly is doing the watching? Try it, right now. Watch yourself become aware. Try to witness the very instant your mind kicks on. You'll find a strange slipperiness, a glitch, like trying to bite your own teeth. The act of observation always seems to start just after the moment it's trying to observe. You're always one frame too late, one thought behind. Consciousness lights up the room, but it cannot shine directly on the bulb itself. The source of awareness is always just outside the spotlight. This is not just poetic. It's structural. Consciousness is recursive, self-referential. It loops back into itself, creating the illusion of a stable eye, watching everything else. But when you try to turn the lens around, when you try to pinpoint the source, you discover there is no fixed point, no singular witness, only awareness aware of awareness, echoing, collapsing. This is why true self-inquiry can feel like falling, not because there are too many answers, but because there is nothing underneath the questions. You try to find the origin of you, and instead you find reflections, stories, memories, a name, a voice, preferences, beliefs. But none of them are the watcher. They are what is watched. You peel away every layer, expecting to find some core, a soul, a self, a consciousness behind it all. But the deeper you go, the more you discover. The observer is not a thing. It is a function, a process, a verb. Not an entity sitting in the control room, but an ongoing cascade of perception, observing perception, folding into itself until the structure begins to tremble. Mystics describe this as ego death. Neuroscientists describe it as recursive feedback. Mathematicians call it infinite regress. Philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness, but no label captures the raw experience, the vertigo of trying to find the edge of a circle that has no beginning, the ache of realizing you can observe everything in your mind, except the moment your mind begins to observe. And yet, this collapse is not destruction, it is revelation. You see, most of your life is lived beneath this paradox. You walk around with a sense of self, a narrator, an internal witness that seems to make sense of everything. You use it to make choices, to feel continuity, to survive. But that self is not the watcher. It's the story the watcher tells. It's the voiceover added to the raw footage, the mind explaining itself to itself just after the moment passes. And so, when you try to catch the watcher in the act, when you say, "There it is," it's already gone. It has collapsed into the next thought, the next reaction, the next frame. Like a quantum particle changing the moment you observe it, your awareness shapeshifts the instant you shine light on it. This doesn't make it meaningless, it makes it holy, because in that collapse, in the impossible attempt to see your own seeing, you find something true. Not an answer, but a space, a silence, a knowing that doesn't require a knower, a presence that watches not from above, but from within. It doesn't have your name, your voice, your biography, and yet it is the most intimate thing you've ever known. You don't possess it. You are it. And when you stop trying to see it, it's already there, looking through your eyes. So what happens when awareness collapses into itself? When the observer tries to observe the act of observing, you wake up. Not to a fact, but to a mystery. Not to clarity, but to peace. Because the cascade is not a failure of the mind. It is the boundary of the map. It is where the machinery of identity crumbles, and something deeper, something wordless, takes over. And in that moment, you don't need to watch the watching. You don't need to prove that awareness exists. You simply rest in it. Let it hold you. Let it breathe you. Let it be. Because the deepest truth of consciousness is not that it can observe everything, but that it doesn't have to. It is enough simply to be here, watching, without needing to know who is watching at all. Awareness, inversion, Prism. You say, "I don't know." You say, "I wasn't aware." But the moment you say that, you are. You've already inverted. Because if you are aware of your ignorance, you are no longer truly ignorant. You have crossed a threshold, one that cannot be uncrossed. This is the awareness inversion prism, a paradox where the act of noticing unawareness collapses it, where ignorance becomes a mask, not a state, where the mind cannot unknow that it knows. You think ignorance is absence, a lack of light, a blank slate, but it's not. It's an illusion that survives only in the dark corners where awareness hasn't looked. The moment awareness turns toward it, even to name it, even to confess it, it vanishes. Because true ignorance is not knowing. It's not even not knowing that you don't know. It's something deeper, unknowing without the capacity to suspect there's anything to know at all. But here's the glitch. You can never witness that state directly. You can only remember it, or pretend it. Because the moment you suspect you might be missing something, you're already not ignorant. You're already standing at the edge of awareness, knocking. This creates a strange fractal trap. A loop in your consciousness where each layer of awareness kills the one beneath it. You think you're lost. You realize you're thinking. Now you're not lost anymore. You become aware of your confusion. And suddenly, clarity begins. This is why children aren't just naive. They are immersed in a world of ignorance that they cannot yet name. But as soon as they ask why, the prism inverts. They begin to climb out. Each why is a cut in the fabric of unconsciousness. Ignorance dies in questions. And yet, many adults still live inside the theater of pretend unawareness. Not because they are truly ignorant, but because they are invested in not knowing. Because once they admit awareness, they can't go back. Once you see the glitch in the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you know the water is rising, you can't pretend to be dry. So we build strategies. We say, "I had no idea. I didn't notice. I was just following orders." But most of the time, there was a flicker, a shadow of awareness, a sliver of discomfort. The mind blinked, but we chose to look away. Because full awareness comes with a price, responsibility, guilt, action. It's easier to be comfortably numb than dangerously awake. But awareness is not a light switch. It's a prism. It refracts. One thought splits into 5. One doubt becomes a flood of mirrors. One moment of noticing becomes a lifetime of seeing things differently. And that's why it's terrifying. Because true awareness doesn't let you go back. Once you glimpse the machinery, the social conditioning, the inherited beliefs, the false self, you can't pretend you didn't. You can try. You can distract yourself. You can drown it in routine or noise. But the prism already inverted. And somewhere inside you, that's what makes real ignorance impossible to hold. Not because you're all-knowing, but because the self-reflective nature of consciousness is always pulling you out of it. You can forget. You can ignore. But you can't become unaware of awareness itself. You can't truly not know once you've wondered if you do. It's like trying to see darkness with a flashlight. The moment you turn toward it, it disappears. So, what does this mean? It means we must be honest. When we say, I didn't know, we must ask, did I really not know? Or did I avoid knowing? Was there a flicker I buried? A truth I sensed but silenced? Because most ignorance is not pure. It is cultivated. It is selected. It is a costume worn by someone afraid of what knowing would cost them. But you are listening to this now. That means you already crossed the threshold. You are aware of the shape of your own unawareness, and that is power. Because from here, you can't go back. You can only move forward, through the prism, through the discomfort of truth, through the collapsing mirrors that lead you not to more certainty, but to a deeper kind of humility. Not the humility of pretending you know nothing, but the humility of realizing that even your ignorance is a construct made of noticing. You were never blind. You were just looking away. And now that you've looked back, you carry something no illusion can take from you. The knowing that you know. Even if it's incomplete, even if it's painful, even if it never ends. And that is not a burden. That is the beginning of waking up. The pretense of raw thought. You believe your thoughts are raw, untouched, personal. You feel something rise inside you. A decision, a feeling, an idea, and you call it yours. You assume it's coming from the authentic center of who you are, pure, original, unfiltered. But pause, slow down. What language are you thinking in? Who taught you those words? Where did that sentence in your mind learn to walk? This is the pretense of raw thought, the illusion that our thoughts are untainted, when in reality, they're built from the rubble of other people's voices. You were born into a storm of language. Long before you had memories, the world was already whispering into your nervous system. Words wrapped around objects. Feelings were named. Truths were taught. Labels were burned into your skin. You didn't invent the word love, but you feel it now and think you understand. You didn't create the word right, but now you chase it. Your every reflection is framed by words someone else built, and you call it consciousness. Language is not a mirror. It's a stage. Every time you think, you're performing lines written generations ago. Every phrase you use, every metaphor, every internal monologue, it was carved by culture, by poets, by victors, by propaganda, by repetition. Even the way you describe your pain isn't born in isolation. It's rehearsed. When you say, I feel broken, what image comes to mind? A cracked object? A machine malfunctioning? That's industrial metaphor, not biology. When you say, I want freedom, what does freedom even mean? To speak, to leave, to own? Your idea of it is sculpted by centuries of flags and borders and philosophies you never asked for. Even silence isn't silent. You think being wordless means you're in touch with something pure. But often, your silence is just the moment between two rehearsed lines. It's the breath before the next inherited idea steps forward. You believe you're having original thoughts, but in truth, you are rearranging inherited grammar. You are reordering symbols from a library you didn't build. And this doesn't make you fake. It makes you human. But the danger lies in forgetting the difference. You assume your ideas are clean because they feel immediate. But immediacy is not purity. Just because a thought feels spontaneous doesn't mean it wasn't pre-installed. Just because a belief feels strong doesn't mean it's true. It might simply be well practiced. How many of your opinions are just echoes in a new voice? How many of your dreams are borrowed from the scripts of movies, songs, systems? Even rebellion is often a recycled pattern, opposite in shape, but born of the same structure. You say, I want to live authentically. But what does authentic even mean in a theater built on performance? Can a script be real if the stage itself is fiction? You search for something original inside yourself. But inside, too, is filled with set pieces, stories stacked like old stage props, ancestral shame, cultural metaphors, political language, childhood mythologies, religious code. You speak of your identity, but the words you use for it didn't come from you. You describe your emotions, but the emotional palette was painted by others. Even your silence, your deepest inward retreat, is shaped by the expectation that silence is profound. And who taught you that? You are trying to be honest, but honesty itself has a costume. So what do? You don't give up thought. You don't stop speaking. You don't erase language. You begin to see it for what it is. Not the raw self, but the lens. Not the truth, but the translation. You ask, what idea am I repeating without knowing? What metaphor have I been living inside? Who does my language serve? You begin to question your questions. And even though that too is a performance, you perform it consciously. There is no escape from theater, but there is awareness of the stage. And with awareness comes space. Space to improvise, to disrupt the script, to speak lines that weren't written to please or to obey. Maybe the truest thoughts aren't the ones that feel raw, but the ones that reveal the costume itself. Maybe your power isn't in discovering the real you underneath all the language, but in seeing how many yous were built by it. And maybe, just maybe, your most honest moment won't sound profound. It might not sound like anything at all. It might be the pause between words, where you feel the weight of everything you've been taught, and choose, for once, not to repeat it. The paradox of permission. You tell yourself you made the decision. You chose to walk away. You chose to speak up. You finally gave yourself permission. And it feels like freedom, like autonomy. Like you stood at a threshold and said, yes, I will. You look back on that moment with pride, as proof that you took control. But beneath the pride, there's a fracture, a quiet paradox you've never quite faced. Because to give yourself permission, you had to believe you already had the right. Somewhere, somehow, even before the moment of yes, you had to believe that such a choice was possible, that it was allowed, that the gate was yours to open. This is the paradox of permission. You cannot give yourself freedom unless some part of you already believed you were free. The act of granting yourself permission isn't the origin of liberty. It's a confirmation of it, a retroactive story that makes the leap feel earned. But the truth is more haunting. The leap was already happening. You tell yourself the permission came first. But did it? Or did something inside you already move, already shift, and the permission simply arrived as the story you built to explain it? Look closely at your so-called brave moments, the career change, the goodbye you finally said, the truth you dared to speak. You say you gave yourself permission, but did you really? Or did the decision rise from somewhere deeper, somewhere wordless, and the permission was just the surface you painted over it? Think of a child raised to obey, to wait, to ask. That child grows into an adult who still whispers internally, am I allowed? Can I do this? Will they still love me if I change? And then, one day, they act. They break the rule, and they call it giving themselves permission. But where did that authority come from? They didn't build it. They didn't download it. They didn't invent the right to act. They remembered it. Somewhere beneath the obedience, beneath the rituals of self-suppression, there was always a fragment that knew, a sliver that refused, a quiet force that waited, patient and burning. Permission doesn't create freedom. Freedom creates the illusion of permission. The belief comes first. The act follows. And the justification arrives after, wearing the costume of, I decided. It gets even stranger. You can only grant yourself permission if you already believe you are someone who can. So, when you say, I gave myself the right, you are making two assumptions. First, that rights can be self-bestowed, and second, that you're already qualified to bestow them. That's the paradox. You cannot assign yourself authority without already claiming the authority to assign it. The moment you try to be free, you reveal that you already believed you were, even if you didn't admit it yet, even if you wrapped it in shame or apology or trembling hope. Every act of self-permission is a mirror, reflecting a belief that was always there, buried maybe, but waiting, watching. And here's the illusion. We build stories around those moments to make them look earned. We say, I found my voice. I grew brave. I gave myself what I needed. It's a comforting narrative. But the truth might be that something else chose. Something unconscious, something ancient, something that didn't wait for your permission. It simply moved, and your mind caught up later, told the story, retroactively labeled it freedom. This doesn't mean you have no will. It means your will might not be what you thought it was. Not a switch you flip, not a throne you sit on, but a series of unconscious pulses, deep decisions that surface only after they're made. And the permission? That's just the frame. So what does this mean for your freedom? It means you don't need to wait to feel ready. So you don't need to build up permission like a ladder. You don't need to justify your fire before you let it burn. Because if you're already wondering, can I? The truth is, some part of you already has. The question itself is evidence. It means freedom is not earned. It's remembered. It's not something you grant yourself in the future. It's something you uncover in the present, like a path beneath dust. It also means that permission isn't something to perform. It's not about dramatic declarations or sudden reinventions. It's quiet. It's already there. The act of noticing it is enough. The act of walking it is truth. And it means you can stop apologizing for the things your soul already decided, the art you make, the boundaries you set, the dreams that keep waking you up at night. You don't need anyone's approval, not even your own, to begin, because the beginning happened already. You're just catching up. The paradox of permission is not a trap. It's a door. It shows you that the thing you're waiting for, you already have it. The voice that says, you may, it's just the echo of the part of you that already did. So the next time you think you need permission, stop. Ask instead, who is asking? Who is waiting? And who already moved ahead while I stood here pretending I wasn't ready? Because you are, and you were, and you didn't need to be told. Ontological trapdoor effect. You open your eyes and ask the oldest question, do I exist? A simple thought, a philosophical itch. Maybe it hits you in a moment of silence. Or maybe after too many sleepless nights, you try to hold it in your hands, but it keeps slipping. Because as soon as you try to deny your existence, something strange happens. You prove it. This is the ontological trapdoor effect, a paradox so deep it folds the mind in on itself. To say, I do not exist, you must use the very thing you're denying. A voice, a mind, a center of awareness. The moment you try to vanish, you leave fingerprints behind. Your denial becomes proof. Try it. Say it now. I do not exist. But who said that? Whose voice did you just hear? Whose thought shaped the sentence? The words didn't emerge from nothing. They had rhythm, structure, intention. Which means there's a speaker, even if it tries to claim it isn't there. To question being is to confirm being. It's like trying to erase a sentence by writing it, trying to draw invisibility. The act itself betrays the claim. You become the contradiction. And this is where the trapdoor opens, because you realize you can't step outside of existence to inspect it. You're inside the system, questioning the system, using tools the system gave you. Your thoughts, your doubts, your logic, they're all happening within the experience you're trying to disprove. Even the most radical denial, the solipsist, the nihilist, the void seeker, has to stand on a platform of presence to make the argument. You can't say nothing is real unless you are real enough to say it. And so, the denial collapses under its own weight. Your existence becomes a contradiction engine, a loop of logic feeding on itself, generating paradoxes with every attempt at escape. And the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Imagine a being whose only job is to scream, I am not real, forever. It echoes in a void, trying to undo itself. But every scream is a confession. Every breath it uses to deny its presence is another line in the proof of its reality. This is not just philosophy. It's ontology, the study of being. And the trapdoor it reveals is not just abstract. It lives in your consciousness. You may try to escape identity, to dissolve ego, to say, I am nothing. But who is saying that? The voice that seeks emptiness still belongs to someone. The desire to be nothing is still a desire. It cannot come from non-existence, even in meditation. Where the goal is to silence the self, you still sit there, being. Even the absence you chase is framed by the presence of the one chasing it. This is why the trapdoor is so disturbing, because it shows you that you cannot leave yourself. You can mutate, doubt, deny, dissolve, destroy, but you are still the one doing it. And so, your presence haunts everything. You are the ghost in every corner, the mirror in every room, the contradiction in every question. You are both the voice and the silence behind it. And here's the twist. This paradox doesn't just affect the self. It affects all systems of thought. Every theory about reality, science, religion, metaphysics, must come from within the very reality it's trying to explain. Every definition of truth is invented by beings that may be trapped in illusions. Every philosophical model is drawn using crayons made of assumption. We try to build ladders to climb out of the void, but the ladders are made of the void. So where does that leave us? Maybe it leaves us here, in a state of paradox. Not in clarity, but in awareness, in the ability to recognize the loops we live in, to see the trapdoor not as a flaw in logic, but as a feature of being. You exist. You may not know what you are, or why, or for how long. But the fact that you are asking, feeling, listening, that's the spark. That's the anchor. And yes, it creates contradictions. But those contradictions are alive. They pulse. They ache. They point to something realer than certainty. Something that can't be boxed in by logic or crushed under a conclusion. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mind was never meant to solve existence. Maybe it was meant to feel it, to burn in the paradox, to become a kind of living question, always folding, always unfolding. So when you next hear that voice inside, the one that whispers, maybe none of this is real, don't silence it. Let it speak. But don't forget, the whisper itself is proof. The doubt itself is sacred. The denial requires you. And as long as that contradiction burns, you're still here, still wondering, still real. Self-denial, continuum loop. You want to be free. And you've heard that the path to freedom leads through ego death, through surrender, through the quiet annihilation of the I that clings, wants, competes, compares. So you begin to erase yourself. You watch your reactions. You detach from desire. You meditate. You speak in soft tones. You say things like, there is no me, only awareness. You wear humility like a cloak. But deep down, a question starts to grow. Who is trying to erase the ego? This is the self-denial continuum loop, the subtle trap where the very act of ego erasure becomes another expression of ego, another identity, another performance. You try to dissolve the self only to create a new self who is now the one dissolving. You become proud of your detachment. You compare your humility to others. You start to see yourself as someone who has seen through the illusion. And that belief, too, is ego. It's recursive. You step out of the ego and step into another ego that's built around not having one. You renounce your desires and take pride in your renunciation. You suppress your hunger for attention and begin to crave being seen as someone who doesn't crave. You escape the spotlight only to secretly hope someone notices your absence. This is the loop, the endless spiral of self trying to erase self, without realizing it is itself, the eraser and the erased. And it's terrifying, because now even your noblest intentions feel suspicious. Even your silence has a voice. Even your stillness feels staged. You try to disappear, but the part of you watching yourself disappear still exists. The spiritual ego is the most camouflaged version of all. It hides behind enlightenment quotes and deep-sounding phrases. It claims to be selfless, but it secretly wants to be seen as wise. It seeks approval for not seeking approval, and it grows stronger the more you try to cut it out. You say, I'm not my thoughts, but who's saying that? You say, I've let go, but you want people to know you've let go. You pretend to be above it all, but that pretense is just another mask. One more character in the story, one more identity in a loop that feeds itself with denial. And yet, this isn't a failure. It's a revelation, because the ego can't be killed by force. It can't be surgically removed like a tumor. It's not an enemy, it's a function, a process, a tool your mind uses to survive. It narrates your life, organizes your memories, filters your emotions. It is not the villain. But when it tries to dissolve itself, it creates an echo chamber, a mirror that reflects itself into infinity. The loop continues until you see it, not with resistance, but with compassion. Until you stop trying to destroy the ego and instead begin to understand it, to laugh with it, to disarm it not with war, but with presence. True ego death is not a single moment. It's not something you achieve. It's not a badge you wear or a title you earn. It is the gradual realization that you were never the thing you were trying to fix. That awareness doesn't need to get rid of the ego to be free. It only needs to stop believing it is the ego. The paradox is this: when you stop trying to transcend the self, transcendence begins. Not because you reached it, but because you stopped chasing. You stopped clinging to the image of who you're supposed to be, even the image of egoless. It's like holding your breath to prove you don't need air. Eventually, you breathe, and in that breath, you stop pretending. You let the ego be part of the story, not the hero, not the villain, just another shape in the sky, another wave in the ocean of being. So when you feel trapped in this loop of trying to escape self only to land in another self, don't panic. Don't fight harder. Just pause. Notice. Breathe. You don't need to disappear to be free. You don't need to erase yourself to find peace. You only need to stop believing that freedom is somewhere outside this moment. The ego doesn't die with denial. It dissolves with light, with truth, with awareness that doesn't try to change what it sees. And in that space, something shifts. You are not the eraser. You are not the erased. You are the canvas underneath it all. Still here, still watching, still enough. The Nullify by naming paradox. There are moments you can't describe, not because they are unclear, but because they are too clear, too whole, too alive. Awe, grief, God, the feeling of standing on the edge of something ancient, something that sees you back. And then you try to speak, to name it, to share it, and in that instant, it dies. This is the Nullify by naming paradox. To name the ineffable is to kill it. The instant you point at the sacred, it shatters into dictionary rubble. You can feel something immense rising in your chest, a truth, a mystery, a wordless knowing that wraps around your bones. But when you try to catch it, to label it, explain it, write it down, you find yourself holding dust. Language is powerful. It lets us map the world, draw boundaries, share meaning, but it is also a blade. It slices the infinite into categories. It turns fluid beauty into frozen signs. It trades sensation for symbol. And sometimes, symbols are not enough. Have you ever tried to describe a dream? The moment you speak, the dream shrinks. It becomes cartoonish. You say, there was a hallway, but not really a hallway, and a light, but not from a sun. Your words chase the dream like a net chases air, and the more you talk, the more it fades. The same happens with love. You feel a presence, a connection beyond thought. You say, I love you. But the phrase feels hollow next to the storm inside you. What you meant is too large for the sentence. It dies between the syllables. Religion tries too. It names the divine. It carves the infinite into doctrines, metaphors, commandments. But every time it speaks, something sacred goes quiet. The mystery becomes dogma. The fire becomes rules. The living presence becomes a statue with a label under it. You cannot hold a miracle inside a paragraph. And yet, we try. Because to not name it is to risk forgetting it, to risk isolation. We want to share the moment, the vision, the transformation. But in doing so, we often lose the very thing we wanted to preserve. This is the trap. Language gives us access, but it also builds a wall. The more precisely we name a thing, the more we distance ourselves from its essence. Psychologists have studied this in a different light. They call it verbal overshadowing, when trying to describe an experience makes your memory of it worse. The act of naming replaces the richness of the experience with simplified categorical thought. You don't remember what you saw. You remember what you said about what you saw. The map replaces the territory. This is why silence is sacred in so many traditions. Why monks, mystics, and visionaries often return from the mountain saying only, "It cannot be told." Because they know, to point at the sacred is to pull it into the world of tools and traffic. and it does not survive the trip intact. You can sing about the moon, but it will not glow on your skin. You can describe a kiss, but it will not make your breath catch. You can say God, but that word has been said so many times, it's barely alive anymore. So what do? We don't abandon language, but we learn to use it with reverence. We speak as poets, not as scientists. We describe without dissecting. We gesture toward the ineffable, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. We say, it felt like standing in the center of a star. It reminded me of something older than the earth. I cannot explain it, but it changed me. And in that humility, in that refusal to stab the mystery with definition, the sacred breathes again. Not as a word, but as a presence. You'll feel this with grief, with beauty, with synchronicity, with love that floods you beyond what language can contain. And if you resist the urge to name it, you might actually get to keep it. Not in your mouth, but in your marrow. Not in your mind, but in the silence behind your thoughts. There, the sacred waits. Not needing to be described, just needing to be noticed. So the next time you feel something that defies explanation, don't rush to name it. Let it shimmer. Let it stretch. Let it transform you without asking for a label. Because once you say what it is, it's already become something smaller. And maybe the holiest things in life are the ones we learn not to speak, but to live. Meaning, compression overload. You want to understand. You want to take the universe, all its chaos and tenderness, its blood and starlight, and fold it into something digestible. You want to compress meaning into logic, into language, into answers. You want to shrink infinity into a sentence that makes sense, a formula, a truth you can hold in your palm like a perfect stone. So you try. You build systems, you build symbols, you stack definitions on top of metaphors and call it structure. You write theology, and you write theory. You write laws of physics and laws of morality and think, I'm getting close now. The shape is forming. But the closer you get, the faster it crumbles. This is meaning compression overload, the collapse that happens when you try to force the infinite into a container too small to hold it. When you try to speak the unspeakable using tools designed only to name chairs and clocks and traffic signals. When your logic, exquisite as it is, begins to warp under the pressure of things it was never meant to carry. It starts slowly. You notice the words don't fit. You try to explain grief, but the sentence sounds like a eulogy written by someone who's never bled. You try to define love, but it feels like describing fire with arithmetic. You try to talk about God, but every word you use feels like a doorway to misunderstanding. And yet, you keep trying. Because the mind is addicted to containment. It wants borders, edges, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It wants to place the ocean into a bottle and call it knowledge. It wants to trap the sky in a box labeled truth. But meaning is not polite. It overflows. It resists. It laughs as your words collapse into paradox and poetry. You say, everything happens for a reason, but the reason keeps changing every time you look at it. You say, we are all one, but the very act of saying we already splits the oneness in two. You say, time is an arrow. Then you dream of futures already past and memories that haven't happened yet. The more precise your logic becomes, the more surreal the world feels. Meaning squirms under the microscope. It decays when isolated. It dies when overdefined. And so, your mind, so sharp, so hungry, starts to short circuit. It reaches for truth and returns with riddles. It tries to map reality and ends up painting spirals. You go in search of clarity and find koans instead. You start to say things like, the truth cannot be spoken. Silence is the loudest scream. Everything means everything and nothing at all. Not because you're being clever, but because language has finally buckled under what you've asked of it. This is where poetic nonsense begins. Not as artifice, not as delusion, but as the last possible language available when the compression algorithm of logic has failed. And here's the paradox. Poetic nonsense often feels more true than clean logic ever did. Not because it explains, but because it evokes. It cracks the surface. It gestures at the abyss. It points at what cannot be grasped and whispers, this, right here. Do you feel it? That's why mystics speak in riddles. That's why prophets contradict themselves. That's why the most profound truths often sound like madness or music. Because if you truly stare into meaning long enough, the need to explain it dissolves, and what's left is resonance, not conclusion. And so you begin to accept the leak. You begin to live inside the gap between what is felt and what can be said. You learn that the most important experiences, birth, death, awe, grief, ecstasy, terror, are precisely the ones that cannot be translated. You stop compressing. You stop translating everything into syllables and syllogisms. You begin to listen instead. You notice the pulse beneath the metaphor, the music behind the sentence, the part of you that understands without needing to speak. Meaning is not a puzzle to solve. It's a song you sometimes remember in your sleep. It's a shimmer on the edge of perception. It's the lump in your throat when no answer feels good enough. So now, when someone asks you what it all means, why we suffer, why we love, why we build things only to watch them fall, you don't offer a lecture. You offer a pause, a story maybe, a poem, a laugh, a tear. Because the meaning you're trying to compress was never meant to be compressed. It was meant to be lived. It was meant to be touched without words. It was meant to haunt you, not define you. So, go ahead. Let your logic bloom. Let your language dance. But know that the deepest meanings will always slip through the gaps. Not because you failed to understand, but because understanding was never the point. The point was to feel it anyway. The Now Disintegration Law. You say the word now and feel the ground of the present beneath your feet. You imagine this instant, this breath, this heartbeat, as something solid, something touchable, something real. But the moment the word leaves your lips, it's already gone. You can't hold it. You can't freeze it. You can't even truly see it. You point to the present, and you're pointing to something that's already vanished. This is the Now Disintegration Law, the terrifying, beautiful truth that the present moment can never be captured. Not fully, not directly. Because the instant you try, it breaks, disintegrates, becomes memory. You say, I'm here. But the here is already in the past. Your brain is always behind. Your sense is always delayed. The sound you hear was already a vibration a few milliseconds ago. The light you see took time to travel. Even your thoughts, your awareness of thinking, are echoes of signals already fired in your brain. You are always slightly too late for the moment you claim to be in. This is not metaphor. It's physics. It's neurology. It's time itself. Your perception of now is not the present. It's a reconstruction. A story your brain tells to make sense of delay. Scientists call it the specious present. The few milliseconds your mind stitches together into a coherent now. But it's not truly present. It's a cinematic illusion. A trick of editing. You never experience the present directly. You experience the ghost of it. A phantom flicker. A version processed, delayed, translated. And yet, you live as if the now is real, as if this moment is a platform you can stand on. But try to grab it, and it's already memory. Try to name it, and it turns into concept. Try to freeze it, and it becomes the past. You say now, but the second the word is formed, the now is lost. Only the residue remains, only the echo. This disintegration haunts everything. Your actions, your choices, your regrets. You think you're acting in the moment, but you're reacting to the moment that just died. You try to change course, but your steering wheel is lagging behind the curve of time. Every decision you make is already posthumous. Every breath you take is already old. And yet, this broken now is all you have. You try to live mindfully. You try to be present. You sit still, breathe deep, and whisper, "This is the moment." But what you're really doing is dancing with disappearance. You're building a relationship not with presence, but with vanishing. Every time you think you've arrived, it slips through you. This isn't failure. It's the structure of time itself. And the more closely you look at now, the stranger it becomes. Because if there is no solid now, where are you? Are you stretched across 1,000 fading instants? Are you a ripple moving across memory and anticipation? Are you a process, not a point? And if now is always disappearing, then who is the you who keeps trying to catch it? This is the spiritual and existential crisis hidden in plain sight. You were taught to live in the moment. But the moment isn't a place. It's a disappearing act. To be present is to surrender to constant loss. To be alive is to be always slightly late to your own experience. So, what do you do with this? Maybe you stop trying to own the present. Stop trying to pin it down like a butterfly in glass. Maybe you learn to live not in the moment, but with it, as it flees, as it flickers, as it collapses behind you. Maybe you stop asking, where is now, and start asking, who is watching it dissolve? Because if now is a mirage, then presence is not a place, it's a posture. It's not standing still. It's staying awake while everything flows away. It's realizing that your life is not made of solid points in time, but of constant transitions, endless fade-ins and fade-outs. You are not here. You are always becoming. And maybe that's the point. The Now Disintegration Law isn't a curse. It's a reminder that life isn't lived in moments, but in movement, in flow, in the space between what just was and what's about to be. You don't find truth in holding the present. You find it in watching the present vanish without flinching. So speak the word now, watch it die, and smile. Because even though the present slips away like sand through your fingers, your awareness of its passing, that subtle witnessing, is the only real anchor you've ever had. The silence performance paradox. You decide not to speak, not to respond, not to post, not to explain, not to participate. You step back, go quiet. You retreat into stillness. You tell yourself, this is not a performance, I'm just being. But someone notices. And now, your silence means something. This is the silence performance paradox. The haunting truth that even your stillness speaks. That even when you withdraw, your absence becomes a kind of presence. You cannot not perform. Even when you reject the stage, you're still on it. You sit quietly in a room and someone thinks, they're deep, or they're angry, or they don't care. You weren't trying to send a message, but you did, because every action or inaction is interpreted. Your silence becomes a broadcast. Your stillness becomes theater. Your withdrawal becomes a script that others start reading. You didn't write it, but they'll perform it anyway. You cross your arms, not because you're defensive, but because you're cold. Someone sees it and thinks, she's closed off. You stare out the window, not because you're bored, but because your mind needed air. They see it and think, he's rude, distant. You didn't say a word, but your body did. Your silence did. Your absence spoke. And this is where the trap tightens, because now, even when you try to be authentic, someone will see it as strategy. You cry in private, and someone later says, you're being dramatic. You remain silent in an argument, and they say, you're manipulative. You speak up once, and they say, you're always trying to be the center of attention. The world cannot see your intention. It only sees your signal. And even when you withhold the signal, that withholding becomes the message. In a digital world, this intensifies. You don't reply to a text. Now your silence means something. You don't like a post. Now your inaction sends a message. You don't show up to a gathering. Now your absence is loud. You tried not to play the game, but the game kept playing you. You thought silence was neutral, but it never is. It's always marked, always noticed, always translated. And here's the part that stings. Even your emptiest self performs. You sit alone, trying to find the version of you that exists without others. But the thoughts still echo with imagined judgment. What would they think if they saw me now? Even when alone, you rehearse invisible conversations. Even in solitude, you edit yourself. Because the audience lives inside you now. Years of feedback, praise, criticism, comparison have carved out a theater in your head. A place where invisible others still sit, watching, waiting, judging. And you, even when silent, even when numb, still act. And so you ask, is it even possible to be real anymore? The answer is complicated. You can be sincere. You can feel deeply. You can want truth. But you can never fully escape performance. Because humans are social. Because meaning is shared. Because perception is part of existence. Even monks in caves are seen as symbols. Even hermits become stories. Even silence becomes speech. But here's a deeper truth. Performance is not always a lie. We've been taught that performing means faking, that it's something shallow or manipulative. But that's not always true. You perform when you comfort someone, when you dance, when you create, when you pray, when you put on your best self, not to deceive, but to express something real in a world that demands masks. The problem isn't the performance. The problem is forgetting it's a performance, mistaking the role for the soul, living so long inside the act that you can no longer find the actor. You don't need to erase your performance. You need to become aware of it. You need to know when you're signaling, why you're signaling, and when you choose to stay silent, what message you're willing to send anyway. Because silence always sends something. So, the next time you withdraw, ask yourself, not, am I being real, but what is this silence shaping in their eyes? And more importantly, am I okay with that? Because every time you try to disappear, you leave a silhouette behind. Every time you try to go invisible, the outline remains. And even the outline will be interpreted. But this is not defeat. This is a deeper kind of awareness. You don't escape performance by retreating. You transcend it by being conscious of it, by realizing that even when you speak nothing, you are still part of the conversation. The performance never ends, but neither does your power to choose what kind of echo you leave behind. You are not just the actor. You are the one learning to hold the script lightly. You are not just the silence. You are the meaning that pulses beneath it. And even when you say nothing at all, you are heard. Intention, reversal feedback loop. You try to stop controlling. You try to let go. You say, I release it. You breathe deeply. You exhale tension. You tell yourself, I won't interfere. You try to surrender. You try to silence the desire to shape, to guide, to fix, to bend reality toward your will. You say you're stepping back. You say you're accepting. But beneath the surface, something strange is happening. Something quietly recursive. Because you're not just letting go. You're letting go. With a goal. You've set an intention to have no intention. You are now controlling the act of not controlling. The surrender itself becomes the next move in your strategy. The moment you try to release your grip, you're already gripping again. This time, gripping the release. This is the intention reversal feedback loop. The moment when intention tries to erase itself and instead creates a mirror, an echo that cannot be shut off, because even the act of shutting it off is an act. You say, let it be. But what you really mean is, let it be. So I can finally feel peace. Let it be. So I can get the result I want by pretending I don't want it anymore. It sounds enlightened. It sounds wise. But something in your body still leans forward, still holds its breath, still watches the clock. You aren't surrendering. You're performing surrender. This loop is subtle. It's not easy to catch, because the mind is clever. It knows how to play both roles, the one who tries and the one who tries not to try. It says, we're not controlling anymore. We're free now. But it's still steering, still shaping, still whispering to the universe. Did you see that? I'm being good now. Where's my reward? The paradox is sharp. You want to stop intending, but to do that, you have to form a new intention, the intention not to intend. You want to let go, but you want the letting go to work. You want detachment to deliver results, but the moment you want detachment, you're already attached to detachment. It's like trying to fall asleep by forcing yourself to fall asleep. The more you push, the more awake you become. Or trying to be humble so people notice how humble you are. Or trying to meditate your thoughts away while constantly thinking, am I doing this right? There is no escape through intention, because intention creates the path it then tries to deny. So what happens when you see the loop? When you realize that even your letting go is entangled with expectation? You may feel disoriented, like a trapdoor has opened under your logic, like there's no clean way out. Because every move is stained. Every action contains its opposite. Even silence can scream. But here's the secret. The goal isn't to escape the loop. The goal is to notice it, to hold it gently, without needing to collapse it. The act of simply witnessing the paradox is enough. Because once you stop trying to use non-control as a tool of control, something inside loosens. You stop aiming. You stop hoping that surrender will reward you. And instead, you just witness. You become the awareness behind the effort, the watcher of the watcher, the one who sees intention rise and fall like waves, and no longer mistakes the waves for the ocean. And slowly you begin to understand, peace doesn't arrive because you earned it through perfect detachment. Peace arrives when you stop performing detachment at all, when you allow intention to rise and fall without needing to reverse it, without needing to make it sacred or shameful. You say, I am trying not to try. Fine. Then notice that trying. Let it burn itself out. Let the recursive engine run until it stalls. Eventually, intention stops chasing its own tail, not because you made it stop, but because you stepped out of the loop. You didn't break it. You just stopped believing it had to be broken. This is the stillness beneath reversal. Not the stillness you create, but the stillness that's already there. When the performance ends, no goal, no surrender, no intention about intention, just you, breathing, being, unfolding. The non-attachment attachment. You seek peace. You want freedom from pain, from chaos, from the gnawing hunger of desire. So you learn detachment. You let go of craving. You release expectations. You say, nothing controls me now, I am free. But are you? Or have you simply built a new identity, one that is addicted to not being addicted? This is the non-attachment attachment, the paradox where your detachment becomes its own obsession, where your freedom becomes a performance, where your nirvana is just another craving, dressed in silence and stillness. You say you've let go. But what happens when someone threatens your calm, when someone says you're still attached? Do you feel the sting rise, the need to defend, to prove your detachment? If so, you haven't let go. You've just replaced the object of desire. Instead of clinging to money, status, or love, you're now clinging to the idea of transcendence. You want to be above it. You want to rise beyond the storm. But secretly, you want to be seen as someone who's risen. You want your detachment to mean something, to make you powerful, special, untouchable. And in that moment, you've fallen into the oldest trap. Ego dressed as emptiness. You've made a self out of non-self, an identity out of dissolution. It whispers, I don't need anything. I'm not like the others. I've transcended. But true detachment doesn't need to say those words. It doesn't broadcast. It doesn't prove. Because real freedom isn't loud. It isn't stoic silence on display. It's not a monk on a pedestal or a minimalist with perfect white walls. Real detachment is soft, invisible. It doesn't cling, even to the idea of not clinging. This is where many seekers get lost. You read the books, you meditate, you throw away your possessions. You say, I don't need love. I don't need validation. I don't need meaning. But in truth, you still do. You've just pushed those needs underground. You've made them taboo inside yourself. You say, I'm not supposed to want. So you bury the wanting. And now it haunts you in subtler ways. In your need to be seen as spiritual. In your fear of being called ordinary. In your obsession with staying calm. Even when your soul is screaming. You didn't transcend desire. You just gave it new clothes. You didn't escape the ego. You just gave it a better script. So, how do you know if you're truly detached or just performing it? Ask yourself, what happens when you lose control? When life pushes you into grief, mess, longing? Do you meet it honestly, or do you try to float above it? Do you say, I am feeling this, or do you say, I shouldn't be feeling this? The moment you shame yourself for being human, you've mistaken suppression for peace. You've mistaken numbness for wisdom. And the most dangerous part? It feels right. It feels advanced. It feels enlightened. But if your detachment is rigid, if it isolates you, if it silences your heart in the name of serenity, then it's not freedom. It's a cage made of silence. Because freedom doesn't mean never feeling. It means not being ruled by the feeling. Detachment doesn't mean I don't care. It means I can care without collapsing. You can love and still let go. You can grieve and still be whole. You can long for beauty, meaning, connection, without becoming their prisoner. True non-attachment isn't cold. It's warm, open, fearless. It says, I will meet life as it comes, without gripping, without hiding, without pretending I'm above it. And in that softness, you find what you were seeking all along, not the high of transcendence, but the quiet strength of presence, the kind that stays through chaos, that weathers grief without needing to fix it, that desires without addiction, that surrenders without erasing itself. So, if you find yourself clinging to calm, let go. If you're attached to letting go, let go of that too. Because even nirvana becomes a burden when you chase it like a prize, and true peace only arrives when you stop needing peace to prove anything, when you stop making your emptiness into armor, and start letting yourself be real, alive, imperfect, fully here. Rejection of experience. Paradox. You come to a point in your search where you begin to doubt everything. The world feels like a projection. Thoughts feel like echoes. The body feels like borrowed scaffolding. You begin to suspect that Maybe all experience is an illusion. Not just this dream or that memory, but the entire mechanism of experiencing itself. You say it quietly at first. None of this is real. You say it with distance, maybe even pride, as if you've peeled back the final curtain and seen the machine behind the theater. You say it with the conviction of someone who's awakened, who no longer falls for the trick of sensation, emotion, time, but then it hits you. The experience of thinking all experience is illusion is itself an experience. You cannot say there is no real experience without first experiencing the thought of it. You cannot reject awareness without using awareness to do it. You cannot mentally exit the loop without using the loop's own language. This is the rejection of experience paradox, the strange and terrifying realization that your attempt to mentally escape reality only deepens your entanglement with it, that the very act of declaring experience an illusion becomes an experience that proves itself wrong by existing. It's like trying to bite your own teeth, or shout so loudly that you no longer hear yourself. You can't do it, because you are in it. You are it. And trying to escape experience while using experience is like trying to run away from your own shadow in a spotlight. At first, this feels philosophical. Then it starts to feel existential. Then it begins to feel like a trap. You try to find the edge. You ask, if all is illusion, who is watching it? But every time you ask, you realize that the watcher is also inside the experience. There's no one behind the curtain, just more curtains, more thoughts, more presence pretending to be absence. You try to go deeper. You meditate. You deconstruct. You enter stillness so vast it frightens you. But even in silence, there is the sensation of silence. Even in emptiness, there is awareness of emptiness. You are never outside of experience. You are always within it, folding over itself like a hall of mirrors that goes on forever. Even doubt becomes part of the dream. Even the desire to wake up becomes another ripple in the illusion you're trying to escape. So what now? You can't exit the loop. You can't win the argument. Because every counterclaim is another experience being claimed. You realize this is not just a mental paradox. It's a metaphysical lockbox, and you are the key and the box, and the one staring at both. And then, something shifts. You stop trying to escape, not because you give up, but because you see it. Experience isn't the enemy. Experience is the stage, the mirror, the pulse. It may be illusion, but it's an illusion that's happening, and in happening, it means something. Maybe not in logic, maybe not in proof, but in presence. You were so busy trying to call it fake, you forgot to let it live. You forgot that even a dream has beauty. Even a simulation has pain. Even an illusion has weight. And maybe that's the point. Because if everything is illusion, and yet you cry, and yet you love, and yet you break and rebuild and yearn for meaning, then the illusion is sacred in its own right. Not because it's real in the way you once thought, but because it's real enough to matter. So you no longer need to exit the paradox. You can breathe in it, walk in it, love in it. You no longer need to declare this is not real as if that dismisses it. You can whisper instead, this is what real feels like, even if it's made of dreams. You let the thought be just a thought. The doubt be just a doubt. The moment be just a moment. You stop needing to trap truth in absolute logic. You stop trying to beat the mirror at its own game. You realize, finally, that the only way out is in. And in that quiet acceptance, something strange happens. The loop softens. The trap feels less like a prison and more like a dance. The paradox becomes not a wall, but a window. And the self who tried to escape, he never had to leave. He just had to turn around and see that he was never separate to begin with. Purity contamination effect. You try to find something untouched, some pure mental clarity, a clean truth, a thought unspoiled by culture, by fear, by language, something real, something untouched. But the moment you try, the stain appears. Because to reach for purity is already to assume you know what purity looks like. To search for unfiltered truth is to bring your filters with you. You carry bias into the act of trying to be unbiased. You contaminate the silence with your definition of silence. This is the purity contamination effect. The paradox that the more purely you try to think, the more your pursuit injects assumptions into what you're thinking about. You don't arrive at clean truth. You arrive at truth with your fingerprints all over it. You want objectivity, but you arrive carrying memory, emotion, instinct, trauma, hope. You want to see clearly, but the eye itself cannot see itself. You want to strip away illusion, but the tool you use to do it is already soaked in illusion. Even the question, what is real, is packed with assumptions. That there is a real, that it's findable, that your mind is the right tool to detect it. You never come to the truth clean. You come crawling with context. You try to remove ego, but it's ego that's doing the removing. You try to step outside yourself, but the self is what's trying to step. You meditate, analyze, strip away layers, but every layer removed is chosen by a mind conditioned to believe which layers matter. Even philosophy, even science, even spiritual practices designed to purify the mind are themselves shaped by historical, cultural, linguistic contamination. The idea of purity itself is a cultural construct, and your pursuit of it is not outside of that. It's saturated with it. You think, if I just go deep enough, I'll reach bedrock. But bedrock turns out to be another assumption, another idea about what truth should feel like, should sound like, should confirm. It's like trying to wipe a window clean with oily hands. The harder you wipe, the more streaks you leave. The more effort you bring, the more your effort distorts. Your wanting pollutes the process. Your hunger to know reshapes the answer. And yet, we keep trying. We sit in silence. We fast. We pray. We write. We think harder. We study the universe. We analyze our behavior. We ask, who am I really beneath all of this? And the answer, if it comes, is never fully clean. It's always dipped in metaphor, always echoes of other voices. This isn't failure. This is structure. You were born into a mind that cannot fully escape itself, a consciousness that cannot observe without coloring what's observed. The same mind that seeks the truth also needs meaning, comfort, narrative. Even if you say, I want to know the truth no matter what, that desire is itself a shaping force. A pressure, a thumb on the scale. The purity you want may not even exist, and if it does, you may not be capable of recognizing it without transforming it in the act. Because to know is to translate, and to translate is to distort. Even quantum physics tells us that the observer affects the observed. You cannot touch truth without changing it. So what do? Maybe you stop reaching for purity like it's a possession, like it's something you get to hold and frame and name. Maybe you learn to witness the streaks, to trace the fingerprints, to realize that the smudge is part of the experience. You can still seek, still think, still strip away the obvious noise, but you let go of the fantasy that your thought will ever be sterile. You admit that the lab is contaminated, and always was. You don't give up on truth. You just stop trying to freeze it, because maybe truth isn't a diamond you unearth. It's a river you enter. You don't own it. You move with it. You let it change you, stain you, soften you. You let it be bigger than your definitions of clean. You stop asking, is this the purest thought I've ever had? And start asking, is this the most honest thought I can hold right now, knowing how tangled I am? And in that moment, maybe for a second, you approach something real. Not because it's perfect, but because you finally stop pretending you were. The purity contamination effect isn't a warning. It's a mirror. It shows you the limits of your mind not to shame you, but to free you from pretending you're limitless. Because truth doesn't need you to be pure, it needs you to be present. Observer implosion principle. You are the seer, the one who watches, the one who knows, I am. Not just a body in space, but a mind aware of itself. A light turned inward, a presence that observes its own presence. But something strange happens when the observer turns too sharply inward. It begins to fold. You look at yourself, watching. Then you see yourself watching yourself. Then you become aware of that awareness. And with each layer, the self begins to unravel. This is the observer implosion principle, the haunting moment when the act of seeing yourself seeing becomes an infinite mirror, a recursive loop so sharp it collapses into silence. You try to find the center, and there's no one left. You don't disappear. You dissolve. It starts innocently. You notice a feeling, a thought, a flicker of self-reflection. You ask, why did I say that? Why do I feel this? But instead of finding an answer, you find another version of you asking the question. Then another, then another. each one looking over the shoulder of the last, until there's no original voice, no true source, just reflections. Like holding a mirror to a mirror and watching the universe repeat itself into nothing. You realize you're not the voice in your head, but you're also not the one listening to the voice. You are the awareness of the listener of the voice, and that awareness has no boundary, no name. It cannot be seen because it is always what is doing the seeing. This is where the implosion begins, because you're not designed to observe yourself fully. You are the eye, but the eye cannot see itself directly. The moment it tries, it creates hallucinations, mirrors within mirrors, until the image devours its own frame. You are not just watching. You are watching the watcher, and each time you peel back a layer, you find another mask, another echo. You begin to ask, is there a real me beneath all this? But the question is a trap, because the moment you try to define yourself, you turn yourself into an object, a frozen shape, a character. But the real self, the seer, is never still, never defined. It flows, it observes, it moves, and the moment you try to hold it, it slips through your hands like water, because you cannot step outside your own awareness to analyze it. There is no third-person view of the soul, and so, the deeper you stare, the thinner you become. The self evaporates under its own gaze. What was once solid becomes transparent. The thoughts that felt personal now feel like echoes. The identity that felt stable begins to blur. You start to see through the person you were pretending to be, and you discover there may be no person there at all, only layers, only masks, only performances held together by memory and momentum. This realization is not just philosophical, it's visceral. You feel it in your gut, in your breath, in that dizzying sensation of staring into a mirror too long and no longer recognizing the face looking back. That feeling of, wait, who is doing the looking? And then silence. No answer. Because there is no solid self to find. Only awareness collapsing into itself. This is the implosion. This is where the ego dies. And for a moment, it's terrifying. You lose your name, your role, your history. You lose the idea that I am this person with these preferences in this world. All the scaffolding you use to define yourself falls away, and yet, something remains. Not a person, not a thought, but a presence. Quiet, watching, not claiming anything, not narrating, just being. It was there before the mirror, and it will be there after. The observer cannot be seen, but it can be felt. Not as an idea, but as a clarity, a light, a stillness beyond thought. It does not speak. It does not judge. It simply is. And that may be the most honest version of you. Not the roles, not the reflections, not the one asking the questions, but the space in which the questions appear. The implosion isn't destruction, it's return. To the source. To the pure field of awareness that was never a person to begin with. And once you touch that, once you fall all the way through the mirror, you stop needing to explain yourself. You stop clinging to definitions. You stop searching for the real you, because you see that the search itself was the illusion. You are not the thing being seen. You are the seeing. And in that infinite mirror, when the reflections vanish, when the thinker dissolves into thought, when the seer disappears into seeing, what's left isn't empty. It's freedom. Because once the performance ends, once the implosion is complete, once you stop needing to be someone, you are finally free to just be. And in that silence, you discover a truth beyond words. There is no one inside the mirror, but something is still watching. Free will rejection. Feedback. You say free will doesn't exist. You've read the arguments, you've watched the lectures, you've seen the neuroscience that shows your brain makes decisions milliseconds before you're aware of them. You believe that everything you do is a product of biology, environment, trauma, instinct, culture, factors you never chose. You didn't pick your genes, you didn't write your childhood, you didn't decide the thoughts that appeared in your head. You are a puppet, you say, with no strings in sight, just patterns firing in a system too vast to understand. But stop, breathe, and ask yourself one question. Did you choose to believe that? Because if you say no, If you claim your belief in determinism was itself determined, then what confidence can you have in it? What trust can you place in a conclusion you didn't choose, a thought you didn't guide? If your mind is just running a program, then any belief, no matter how elegant or logical, is just the mechanical echo of inputs you didn't control. But if you say yes, if you did choose to believe it, then you've proven free will in the very act of denying it. Because choosing belief is an act of agency, a decision, a movement of mind that implies there was a you behind the thought, not just thought happening without a you. This is the free will rejection feedback, the mental glitch where denying freedom becomes an accidental proof of it. You say you're just following the data, but the decision to follow data over desire, evidence over emotion, that is a decision. One that implies a self, a standard, a chooser behind the choice. The paradox deepens. You say, but I couldn't help believing it. It made too much sense. Yet, even that reveals a ghost of agency. The moment you distinguish between what makes sense and what doesn't, you are weighing ideas, filtering, aligning yourself with one path over another. A computer doesn't choose what makes sense. It just computes. But you paused. You thought. You aligned. And here's where it spirals. Because every argument against free will, every quote, every study, every bold claim is delivered by someone who chose to speak, who chose to argue, and who hopes you'll choose to agree. Even the idea of persuasion breaks down without the concept of agency. If humans are just wind-up toys, why bother debating at all? Why write books? Why build philosophy? Why try to convince anyone of anything? To convince is to believe the other can change their mind. To change their mind is to imply they have one. You can't escape it. Even your surrender is a choice. Even your apathy is a posture. Even your embrace of determinism is laced with decision. Because underneath all the logic, all the evidence, all the rational surrender to cause and effect is a feeling. A subtle pride in being the one who figured it out. A sense of special clarity. A belief in your own mental path as superior to others. That belief is ego. That belief is self. And self implies will. You say free will is an illusion. Fine. But illusions don't appear without a witness. A hallucination still needs a mind to see it. Who then is the one being fooled? What perceives the illusion, if not a subject? You can't escape the loop, because even when you try, you are choosing to try. Even when you collapse into fatalism, you are acting out a role. Even when you say, there is no me, you are still the one saying it. So what now? Maybe you realize free will isn't about total control. It's not about escaping causality. It's about space, micro-movements, tiny pockets in time where thought meets awareness, and you steer. Maybe just a little. Maybe not always. But enough. Enough to pause before reacting. Enough to reflect instead of repeating. Enough to rise above the script you inherited and write one new line. You don't have to believe in full freedom to feel it. Even the smallest ember of choice is sacred. Because if everything is truly pre-written, then nothing you believe matters. But if there's even a flicker of authorship left in you, then everything matters more than you ever imagined. So go ahead. Try to reject free will. Try with all your logic, all your certainty. But every time you do, you prove it was there. Infinite self-skeptic Cascade. You begin with a simple doubt, a flicker in your mind. What if I'm wrong? So you examine a belief. You hold it up to the light. You ask, where did this come from? Why do I think this? Is it true? And for a moment, clarity, a breath of skepticism. You feel brave, rational, free. But then another voice arrives, a whisper beneath the whisper. What if my questioning is biased too? What if the lens through which I doubt is also warped? So you dig deeper. Now you're questioning the act of questioning. Is it fair? Is it clean? Or is it just another belief masquerading as logic? But it doesn't stop there, because then the next thought comes. Who is the one doing this questioning? Who is this voice calling the others false? And just like that, you fall. This is the infinite self-skeptic cascade, a loop where every doubt births another, where each layer of certainty is peeled back, only to reveal a new mask, a new voice, a new watcher claiming to be the real one. You become a hall of mirrors, each version of you pointing at the last one saying, that was the illusion. I'm the real thinker now. But the real one never arrives, because with every step, You only reveal another mask, another frame, another self-questioning self. This is not analysis, it's implosion. Because the deeper you go, the more you realize there's no solid floor beneath your mind, no final judge, no objective self to say, this is real. You are a nest of voices echoing. You are a chorus of masks, each removing the one before it. And somewhere in that spiral, you ask, what's left? If I doubt the doubter and question the questioner, who remains? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. Nothing. No fixed self. No final certainty. Just motion. Just process. Just awareness, questioning awareness, forever folding in on itself. Philosophers have danced in this paradox for centuries. Descartes tried to anchor it in, I think, therefore I am. But even that statement assumes the I behind the thinking is real. What if it's not? What if there is only thinking happening with no thinker to own it? Buddhism says the self is an illusion, a bundle of perceptions, memories, patterns, reactions, no core, no captain, just weather passing through a sky that doesn't care. But the ego fights this because it wants to be real. It wants to plant a flag and say, here I am. I'm the one observing all of this. But the moment it speaks, you can ask, who said that? And the cascade continues. So, what do you do with this? How do you live without solid ground? You stop looking for ground. You learn to surf the fall. You realize that not everything needs an anchor, that freedom might not be found in knowing, but in surrendering the need to know. You let go of needing a final self to validate your experience. You stop chasing the real you like a ghost through fog. You start living as if there's no center, only flow, only presence, only now. Because maybe the only thing that survives the cascade is awareness itself, not what it sees, not who sees it, just the act of seeing, not a name, not a voice, just noticing. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the truth doesn't need a throne, maybe reality doesn't need a witness, and maybe peace comes not from answering the final question, but from loving the fact that there may never be one. So, if you find yourself spiraling, falling through layer after layer of inner doubt, don't panic. Don't rush to escape. Stay in the fall. Let the cascade unfold. Let each mask fall away. Let each layer dissolve. Because beyond the questioner, beyond the thinker, beyond the self who doubts the doubter, there is silence. There is spaciousness. There is the quiet miracle of simply being. No need to name it. No need to hold it. Just breathe and let the mirrors fade. Memory authentication void. You say, I remember it, so it must be true. You build your identity on that foundation. You say, this happened. I was there. That pain, that love, that decision, those were mine. And in this fragile continuity of memory, you find yourself. You verify who you are, where you've been, what you've become. But then a question lingers in the silence after your certainty. How do you know your memory is real? You assume memory is a kind of internal camera. It records, it plays back. Maybe it blurs, but you trust it anyway. Because what else do you have? You look in the mirror, and the person looking back at you is constructed from memory. Not just appearance, but emotion, experience, the entire sense of I. Yet, memory has no authentication key, no checksum, no source file you can rewind and replay to check its fidelity. You don't get to relive your past, you only get to remember it. And remembering isn't recalling, it's rewriting. Every time you remember something, you alter it. Every time you revisit a moment, you reconstruct it with the mind of who you are now. You don't remember what happened, you remember your last memory of what happened. This is the memory authentication void. The terrifying realization that the only proof you have of being you is unverifiable, that the story you tell yourself is a collage of neural guesses, emotional echoes, and dreamlike distortions that feel solid only because you have nothing else to compare them to. Science shows us this every day. Memory is suggestible, editable. Two people can experience the same event and store two different stories. Eyewitnesses contradict themselves. Victims doubt their own trauma. Children recall lives they never lived. And you, yes, even you, have memories that never happened. You just don't know which ones. There's no internal signature stamped on your recollections. No warning that says, This one is real. This one is fiction. This one you invented because you needed a reason to survive that day. All of them feel the same. All of them feel like truth. And so, you believe them. You construct meaning out of fragments, a glance, a tone, a childhood smell. You reconstruct entire beliefs around what someone said to you when you were 7. But what if they never said it? What if you misheard? What if you filled in the silence with your fear, your longing? Your identity is a story built on stories, but those stories don't sit on solid ground. They float, layered in illusion, influenced by mood, rewritten by grief, distorted by trauma, and brightened by nostalgia. This isn't just a psychological flaw, it's an existential void. You verify yourself with memory, but memory itself is unverifiable. So, who are you verifying? You say, I know who I am because of what I've lived. But what if your mind has reshaped what you've lived to make it livable? What if your most defining moment, your origin story, has already drifted so far from what happened that it no longer matters whether it was true, only that you believe it? This is where the ground disappears. You begin to question your past, and by extension, your present. If memory is fluid and the self is built on memory, then is your sense of self just a performance rehearsed so well you forgot it was staged? When someone asks you, who are you? You answer with a story. But every chapter of that story is built on echoes, hazy footage, emotional edits, and still, it's all you have. So what now? Do you give up the story entirely? Do you embrace the void? Do you say, I am nothing, and drift into psychological dissolution? No. You don't erase the memory. You learn to hold it lightly. You learn to say, this is what I remember, and that's enough. You begin to trust the emotional truth even if the factual one has cracks. You stop needing verification and start honoring resonance. Maybe your memory isn't a camera. Maybe it's a mirror. A mirror that warps, but still reflects something that matters. You weren't meant to replay life like a machine. You were meant to feel it, however imprecisely. And so, you don't collapse in the void. You stand inside it. You let your memories be what they are. Imperfect, sacred, fragile, and real enough. Because in the end, you are not your past. You are the meaning you continue to make of it. And that it is something no void can take. Null consciousness, assertion. You sit in the dark and you whisper to yourself, I do not exist. You let the words settle like dust in the still air. You want to disappear, not just from others, but from yourself. To erase identity, erase thought, erase being. You want silence so complete that even awareness fades. You want to vanish entirely. But something strange happens. Even in the act of declaring your own non-existence, a presence remains. Something is there to say the words. Something is there to observe the absence. Something is watching the silence, shaping the erasure, narrating the void. This is the null consciousness assertion, the paradox that to say I do not exist is already to prove that something exists to say it. The claim of nothingness is born from a presence. The denial of self is still authored by a self. You can question your identity, you can doubt your name, your memories, your past. You can deny your body, your emotions, your continuity. But the moment you say, I am not here, a ghost answers back. But something is. It's a loop that can't be broken. Because even the voice that says I'm gone has to exist to form the sentence. Even the thought I am nothing must arise in something that is capable of thought. The very concept of nothing becomes contaminated the moment it's spoken. You try to turn yourself into a void, but it's a performed void. A void that knows it's void. And that knowledge alone is presence. The nothingness you seek becomes another mask. You want to dissolve, but the dissolving itself is scripted by the mind still trying to control it. This is more than philosophy. It's neurological. It's psychological. You cannot build a mental state of non-being without engaging the mechanisms of being. To imagine death, you must be alive. To picture absence, you must be present. Even the illusion of emptiness is processed by the self. And so, your attempt to disappear becomes a kind of proof, not of your identity, not of your history, but of your presence, raw, shapeless, undeniable. You are there, even when you say you're not, especially when you say you're not. The mind that tries to erase itself is still a mind. The The self that claims it never existed still uses language, memory, and narrative to do so. You cannot delete the author without first writing the deletion. You cannot deny the self without employing its tools. Even silence is shaped by what is choosing not to speak. And this realization is terrifying to some, because it means there's no exit, no final collapse into oblivion, no clean erasure of the burden of consciousness. You can pretend to vanish. You can dissociate, detach, dissolve into the edges. But something remains. Something watches. Something declares, I have disappeared. And by doing so, reveals it hasn't. It's like trying to bite your own teeth, to see your own eyes without reflection. You can loop forever, but you'll never escape the loop. So what does this mean? That the self is inescapable? That we are trapped in identity? Maybe not. Maybe it means that trying to destroy the self is still a kind of attachment, a need, a grasping for purity, a hunger for control. And that very need is what keeps the self alive. Because when you stop trying to annihilate yourself, when you simply watch the self come and go, rise and fall, you begin to see something deeper, a quiet presence underneath identity. Not a person, not a voice, just awareness. You realize that you are not the self you want to erase. You are not the voice declaring, I do not exist. You are the field it arises in, the space that holds it, the thing that sees it form and dissolve, like a wave on water. You don't need to assert nullness. You don't need to vanish. You were never the story anyway. You were never the one making declarations. You were the screen on which they played. And in this way, the null consciousness assertion is not a dead end. It's a doorway, a mirror, a reminder that even in your deepest doubt, even in your darkest denial, there's something steady, silent, present, not personal, but real. You cannot say, I do not exist, without proving that something does. So stop trying to vanish. Instead, sit quietly with the presence that never needed to be named. That is where freedom begins. Simulation, validation, collapse. You ask the question that breaks everything. What if this is a simulation? Not as a metaphor, not as a sci-fi game, but as a real possibility, that everything you see, feel, believe, every person, every memory, every breath, is a construct, a rendering, a script running inside something you can't perceive. You've heard the arguments, that reality looks suspiciously like code, that quantum mechanics is too tidy, that the universe has limits, glitches, patterns that mimic design, that intelligent beings might one day run ancestral simulations indistinguishable from base reality. You can follow the logic. It makes sense. But then the trap appears, because if this is a simulation, how do you verify it from within? You can't. That's the simulation validation collapse, the moment you realize that the tools you're using to question reality are themselves part of the simulation. The question is simulated. So is the doubt. So is the conclusion. You can't trust the system to prove or disprove itself. Every test you run, every philosophical theory you form, every mathematical model, every sudden insight might be exactly what the simulation expects you to find. You pull back one curtain and there's another behind it, and another, and another. Eventually the curtain becomes a mirror, and it shows you what you don't want to see. You are trapped inside your own verification loop. You start to realize even skepticism can be simulated. You feel proud for doubting everything. But what if that doubt is programmed? You think you're breaking free, but what if freedom is just another illusion designed to keep the system stable? And it gets worse, because now you don't just doubt the world, you doubt the doubter. What is the source of your question? The feeling of inquiry? The instinct to pull reality apart and look inside? What if that too is rendered? What if your sense of agency, your curiosity, your need to know, what if those are inputs, predicted, calculated, controlled? Even your suspicion has no floor, so you ask, then what can I trust? And the simulation replies, exactly. There is no answer that isn't already inside the box, no evidence you can gather that didn't come from the system itself. You can't step outside the rules because the rules define your every attempt to escape them. It's like trying to use a dream to prove you're awake. Even your doubt is written in dream ink. This is the collapse, the place where inquiry eats itself, where logic melts into recursion, where the very idea of real begins to fade, Not because it's false, but because it's untestable. And that's where your mind begins to fracture. You reach out, trying to grasp something solid, a truth untouched by illusion. But everything you touch turns to mist. Belief, memory, science, sensation. They all rely on inputs. And inputs in a simulation are suspect. You remember your childhood. But what is memory in a world built on rendering code? You feel pain. But is pain proof of reality or just excellent programming? You speak to another human being. But is that connection real or just an interaction between two complex avatars, following probabilistic dialogue trees? Suddenly everything becomes slippery, and you feel the urge to stop thinking, to shut the door, to pretend you never asked the question, because the alternative, the endless recursion, the unprovable loop, is too much to hold. But there's another way. Not to escape the simulation, but to see it clearly. You realize you don't need to prove you're in a simulation to be changed by the question. The power is not in confirmation. The power is in awareness. Because once you see that your thoughts could be simulations, your desires, your fears, your beliefs, you become less attached to them, less bound by them. You begin to watch the patterns without falling into them. You begin to play the game consciously. You stop chasing truth like a finish line. You start moving through this world, whatever it is, with intentionality. As if your choices still matter, even if the board is virtual. As if meaning is still meaning, even if it's rendered. Because here's the final twist. Even if this is a simulation, it's your simulation. You are the conscious observer, the glitch in the code, the spark that can reflect on itself. Whether programmed or not, you feel, you question, you change. And that gives you power. Because the system may simulate input, but it cannot simulate awareness of simulation, unless it already built that too. But even then, you're still the one watching. And maybe that's enough. Not to escape the simulation, but to live in it awake, to stop demanding proof, and start asking, how will I move now that I see the floor might not be real? Will I love more deeply because everything might be temporary? Will I act more consciously because the observer cannot be faked? Will I find peace not in certainty, but in radical presence? Because when the simulation collapses, when the question destroys itself, when you run out of ways to prove or disprove what's real, what's left is you, watching, choosing, awake. Purpose, erasure, loop. You tell yourself nothing matters. That purpose is a myth. That meaning is a trick of biology, a side effect of evolution, a chemical illusion designed to keep you moving until you die. You've read the philosophy. You've seen the arguments. A cold, indifferent universe. A planet that spins whether you suffer or thrive. You stare into the void and declare it empty. But there's a problem, one you haven't admitted. Because even as you say nothing has meaning, you're clinging to that thought like it's gospel, like it's a revelation, like it matters. You hold on to the belief that nothing matters, as if it matters most of all. This is the purpose erasure loop, the strange recursion where denying all meaning becomes its own sacred meaning. You try to wipe the slate clean, but you leave one line untouched. There is no meaning. And that line becomes the new scripture, the untouchable truth, the one belief you refuse to doubt. Even though, by your own logic, it should be just as meaningless as everything else. If there's no purpose, why believe that? If nothing is sacred, why defend that idea so fiercely? You argue with those who believe in destiny, or divinity, or dreams. You scoff at their faith. You call them naive. But underneath your cynicism, there is faith too, a faith in meaninglessness, a belief that meaning doesn't exist and that everyone must wake up to that truth. But truth is a value. It presumes that something real is preferable to something false. It presumes purpose. You've built a shrine to emptiness, and you don't even see it. You wear nihilism like armor. But it's not armor. It's a cage. Because here's the catch. If nothing matters, then your belief that nothing matters doesn't matter either. It has no weight, no authority, no power. It's just another noise in the void, no more or less valuable than the voice of someone who believes they were born to change the world. But that's not how you treat it. You defend it. You repeat it. You live by it. So maybe somewhere inside, you do believe something matters. Maybe you just don't want to admit it because hope hurts. Belief is vulnerable. Purpose invites failure. And it's easier to say there is no mountain than to try climbing one and fall. It's easier to say the universe doesn't care than to care deeply and be disappointed. It's safer to believe in nothing than to risk believing in something that breaks your heart. But denying purpose doesn't make the ache go away, that quiet craving, that whisper at 3 a.m. asking why you're here, that strange pull towards certain people, certain places, certain ideas. If meaning is fake, why does meaninglessness weigh so much? Why do you feel it when you lie to yourself about joy? Why does your chest tighten when someone says something true? You don't need to believe in a cosmic plan. You don't need to invent a grand design. But you do need to admit, meaning matters to you, even if it's messy, even if it's invented, even if it's temporary. The very act of asking why means you haven't given up. The very desire to escape meaninglessness is meaning, a spark, a signal, a sign that something in you still wants to build rather than burn. So what if you stopped clinging to the erasure? What if you allowed meaning to be personal instead of universal? What if you chose to give your life meaning? Not because the universe demands it, but because you do. Meaning doesn't have to be eternal. It doesn't have to be written in the stars. It can be small, local, fragile, and still be real. A laugh with a friend, a piece of music that stops time, a story that shakes you, a moment of kindness no one else will ever see. These things won't change the cosmos, but they might change you. And isn't that enough? You don't need to believe in meaning for all. You just need to believe in meaning for now. So the next time your mind loops back to the old script, nothing matters, pause. Ask yourself, why do I keep repeating this? What do I gain from it? What am I protecting? And more importantly, what would I do if I stopped? Maybe you'd feel fear. Maybe you'd feel joy. Maybe, just maybe, you'd feel alive. Not because the universe gave you meaning, but because you gave it to yourself. Authenticity, self-destruct sequence. You want to be real. You want to be honest, raw, authentic, to drop the mask, to show the world the true you. So you peel off the layers. You stop pretending. You say what you think. You wear what you want. You express how you feel. You say, this is me. But then, a strange thought surfaces. Who told you this was the real you? Who taught you what authentic looks like? You pause. You realize your authenticity, this thing you're trying to embody, is itself based on an idea, a blueprint, a performance. And just like that, you trigger the authenticity self-destruct sequence. Because the moment you try to be authentic, you're already performing. You're acting out a version of realness you believe in, curated, filtered, informed by everything you've read, watched, admired. You're not escaping the mask. You're just wearing one made of sincerity. You try to speak from the heart, but your voice is still echoing the language of others. Books, interviews, role models, rebels. You reject conformity and conform to a new ideal, non-conformity. You stop pretending, but now you're pretending not to pretend. You are a rebel in a costume of truth, and the deeper you go, the more the walls crumble. Because what is authenticity, really? Is it just being spontaneous? Is it being emotionally raw? Is it resisting the social script? No matter how you define it, the definition becomes a mold, a shape you try to fit into. And fitting into anything, even authenticity, is still shaping yourself to an idea. You say, I'm being myself. But that self is built on layers you didn't choose. Culture, family, trauma, algorithms. You've internalized signals for what realness means. And now, you're measuring yourself against them. It's a performance of non-performance, a curated self that claims not to be curated. And the more you try to find the real you, the more it slips through your fingers. Because maybe there is no core self, no original, untouched identity waiting to be uncovered. Maybe you're not a sculpture being chiseled into purity. Maybe you're a river, changing, flowing, fed by 1,000 hidden sources. And trying to be authentic is like trying to hold a wave still. It breaks, it collapses, it never stops moving. This doesn't mean you're fake. It doesn't mean your identity is a lie. It means your identity is alive, and anything alive cannot be pinned down without killing it. So what's left? If even authenticity is a mask, if every act of being real is just another version of control, what do? You surrender the idea of being anything. You stop trying to be authentic, and instead, you notice. You live. You respond honestly in the moment, not based on who you're supposed to be, but based on what's true right now. You stop clinging to a version of yourself. You allow inconsistency, contradiction, complexity. You stop trying to look like someone who knows who they are, and accept that you might never fully know. And that's okay, because the most real thing you can do is stop trying to prove you're real. When you let go of being authentic, you can finally begin to act from something deeper than image. You don't need to be raw or edgy or enlightened or deep. You don't need to be the opposite of others. You don't need to build a brand out of your truth. You just need to show up, moment by moment, without grasping for identity. Sometimes you'll be strong, sometimes you'll collapse, sometimes you'll contradict everything you once believed. That's not failure. That's not fraud. That's human. Because realness doesn't live in your idea of yourself. It lives in your ability to stay present without needing to explain who you are. So let the sequence collapse. Let the image of authentic you fall apart. What's left behind the ruins isn't some pure original version of self. It's silence. It's space. It's awareness that doesn't need to declare itself. And in that space, you might finally breathe, not as a brand, not as a performance, not as a curated rebel, but simply as what's here now. No mask, no mirror, no script. Just being before you try to be. Final truth. Cannibalism. You chase truth like a flame in the dark. Not just facts, not just beliefs, but the ultimate, the final truth. The one that would end the seeking. The one that would silence the noise. The one that would finally make everything make sense. You imagine it waiting at the end of some long corridor of insight, deeper than science, beyond philosophy, past doubt, past language, a pure realization, a revelation so complete, so final, that it would collapse all questions into a single perfect answer. But here's the trap. The closer you get to that ultimate truth, the more it begins to consume itself. It folds inward, shrinks, fractures. And by the time you try to hold it in your hands, to speak it, to name it, what you have left isn't truth. It's abstraction. It's paradox. It's the remains of something that was only ever real before you looked at it directly. This is final truth cannibalism, the paradox that devours your search for certainty from the inside out. The closer you come to naming truth, the faster it decomposes. The more precise your language, the less it fits. The clearer your logic, the more it splinters under pressure. The truth eats itself. You say, all is one. But the moment you say it, you've created two things, the statement and the speaker. You've already broken the oneness. You say, there is no self. But that declaration still requires a self to make it. You say, reality is illusion. But the word reality still clings to something, and illusion itself must be experienced by something real. This is the collapse. Not because truth is a lie, but because truth cannot survive being spoken. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's that it only exists before the sentence. The moment you say it out loud, it's already something else. You search for God. You reach a place so silent, so vast, that it terrifies you. So you name it. You call it light or void or love. But the name is not the thing. And once you name it, you begin to worship the word instead of the experience. The symbol replaces the encounter. The finger becomes more real than the moon it points to. You search for meaning. You find it in patterns, numbers, dreams, synchronicity. But the moment you try to explain what it really means, it slips through your logic. It becomes metaphor. It becomes poetry. And the poetry, too, starts to turn in on itself. Truth isn't just elusive, it's unstable under observation. Because truth isn't a destination, it's a dissolving edge. The moment you reach it, it disappears into mist. And still, you keep walking toward it. Why? Because something in you knows it's there. Even if it's not nameable, even if it dies every time you touch it. You don't chase truth because you expect to catch it. You chase it because the chase is sacred. The collapse is part of it. It's not that truth lies. It's that truth at its highest level speaks in a language the mind cannot hold. When you get close enough, logic fails. Belief fails. Words unravel. meaning becomes recursive. Every answer spawns a deeper question, and you realize the final truth was never meant to be said. It was meant to be felt. But even that word, felt, is too small. You stand at the edge of the infinite, and suddenly you are no longer asking questions. You are no longer thinking in sentences. You are just there, wide open, dismantled, silent. And that silence is the closest you will ever get, because if you speak it, you lose it. The truth does not sit on the tongue. It breathes in the gap before words. It exists in the moment before you try to understand. It is the eye seeing itself, the fire burning its own flame, the mouth feeding itself its own voice. So what now? You stop chasing names. You stop believing that articulation is completion. You begin to honor the collapse, to bow to the disintegration. You let the truth speak without speaking. You let it dissolve inside you like a dream you can't explain. But no changed you. And from that space, you stop asking what is true and start whispering. What remains when I stop trying to know? Because in that unknowing, you are closer than you've ever been. Not to the truth that can be captured, but to the truth that can only be entered, and that is enough. Mirror memory distortion. You sit quietly and recall a moment, a childhood kitchen, a birthday candle, a conversation years ago. You reach backward, gently, as if touching a still pond with the tip of your mind. The image rises, faint, blurry, but familiar. You feel the warmth, the smell, the emotion. It feels real. But wait, is this the memory itself? Or is it your memory of the last time you remembered it? You don't remember the moment. You remember the memory. This is mirror memory distortion, the strange invisible spiral where your past becomes a performance of a performance. You no longer remember the original scene. You remember the emotional sketch of how it felt to remember it last time. You remember a copy of a copy. And with each repetition, the truth blurs. The first time it was raw, maybe unclear, maybe sharp, but real. The second time, you brought emotion to it. The third time, nostalgia. The fourth, revision. You filled in details, smoothed over others. You changed faces slightly, rearranged the words, inserted lessons that weren't there before, repainted the background. And now, you're not sure what actually happened. But the image persists because memory doesn't run on accuracy. It runs on coherence, on emotional logic, on story. And so, your memory edits itself like a film, refining its rhythm, cutting its lines, layering in music you swear was there. But it wasn't. You feel certainty. You feel clarity. But what you feel is simply the stability of a narrative that's been rehearsed too many times. It feels true because it's been repeated, not because it was untouched. Every time you recall a memory, you corrupt it. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's neuroscience. When you retrieve a memory, it becomes unstable, vulnerable to new associations, new details, new interpretations. And when you store it again, it's no longer the same. It's been modified, not maliciously, not dramatically, just rewritten. And the scariest part? You don't know you're doing it. You believe the new version is the old one. You believe your mind is a vault, a recording device, a secure archive, but it's not. It's a theater, a mirror chamber, a space of reconstruction. You remember the play, not the moment. You remember how you told it last time, how you felt last time, how others reacted last time. You remember yourself remembering. And this recursive loop feeds itself. Maybe you recall a breakup, a betrayal, a turning point. And each time you revisit it, you add meaning. You extract symbols. You cast yourself in a role, victim, villain, survivor. You shape the moral arc. You refine the dialogue until it feels complete. But was it ever true? Truth becomes impossible to pin down, because the more emotionally significant a memory is, the more it's reshaped by your need to understand it. You don't store facts. You store relevance. What hurt? What healed? What defined you? And this is the paradox. The more important a memory is, the more likely it is to have been rewritten. You look at old photos, you hear an old song, and the memory floods back. You think, yes, this was real, but the memory you're accessing may be your brain playing back your last emotional response to that song. Not the original event. You're walking through a hall of mirrors. Every version of you remembers a slightly different version of the past, and all of them feel right. All of them feel real, because they're internally consistent, they're emotionally persuasive, and that's enough for your mind to accept them as truth. But what does that mean for identity? If your past is a performance, then who are you now? You're a collage of remembered performances, a stitched-together actor wearing masks of old scenes. Your personality is built on memory. Your decisions are shaped by memory. But your memory is shaped by story. And story is fluid. This isn't failure. This is how the mind works. Evolution didn't prioritize perfect recall. It prioritized adaptation. You remember what helps you survive, what helps you bond, what helps you explain yourself. You don't need accurate memories. You need useful ones. But that usefulness comes at a cost. Self-distortion. The person you remember being might never have existed the way you think. The moment you treasure may be partly fiction. The pain you still carry may be tangled in errors your brain refuses to correct. So, how do you live with this? You stop seeking certainty. You stop pretending that your past is a fixed place you can revisit. You begin to treat memory not as fact, but as story. And like all stories, it deserves humility, curiosity, reverence for its fluidity. You can still cherish your past. You can still learn from it. But you hold it lightly. You let it breathe. You say, "This is how I remember it now, but I may not remember it this way tomorrow." Because tomorrow, your mirror may tilt slightly. The light will change. The echo will soften. And your reflection will wear a different face. And that's not a loss. That's what it means to be alive. The self-undoing belief trap. You start to wake up. You look around and realize almost everything you've ever thought was borrowed. Your values, your fears, your sense of right and wrong. They weren't born from some pure place inside you. They were given to you, installed, reinforced, praised, or punished. You begin to see beliefs not as truths, but as cages. And that realization feels like freedom. You start rejecting them, unlearning, questioning. You tear down the scaffolding. You no longer believe in systems, in dogmas, in shoulds. You let go of the stories your culture told you. You decide, I will not be caged by belief. But here's the twist. That too is a belief. This is the self-undoing belief trap, the paradox that haunts every seeker of mental freedom. The moment you believe that beliefs are cages, you've built another cage, a beautiful one, a liberating one, but a cage nonetheless, because now your identity is wrapped around disbelief. You don't just think beliefs are dangerous, you believe it. You don't realize it, but you're still building walls. You're still choosing a lens through which to see the world. You've replaced belief in something with belief in believing nothing. But structurally, it's the same. It shapes what you notice, what you trust, who you let in, what you reject. The key is also a lock. You think you've escaped, but really you've just chosen a new master. You start to feel superior, wiser than those who still believe in things. You hear someone say, everything happens for a reason, and you flinch. You see someone follow a faith, and you roll your eyes. You hear someone speak with certainty, and you think, they're still asleep. But now, you're trapped in reverse faith. You don't believe in gods, but you believe in the idea that there shouldn't be gods. You don't believe in meaning, but you believe it's important to not believe in meaning. You're still carrying a rule book. It just has blank pages. You've become the very thing you tried to escape. This is the trap, and it's subtle. It's not built with commandments. It's built with refusals, with negations, with pride in your rejection. It feels like clarity, but it's a loop. It looks like freedom, but it's armor, and armor is heavy. The irony is sharp. The more deeply you believe that beliefs are traps, the more tightly you're held by that belief. You don't see it, because your belief is disguised as liberation. But real liberation isn't rejection. Real liberation is awareness. It's seeing belief as belief, without needing to destroy it, without needing to cling to it, without needing to identify with it at all. You can hold a belief like you'd hold a flower, gently for a while, until the season changes, because every belief is both a tool and a limit, and some beliefs can be useful, necessary, even beautiful. Love is a belief. Trust is a belief. Art is belief turned into movement. You cannot live without believing in something. Even your body is built on trust. Every breath assumes that the air will come. You cannot erase all belief. You can only become aware of which ones you're carrying and why. When you do that, something opens. You no longer fear beliefs. You no longer worship them either. You see them like you see fire, capable of warmth and capable of destruction. You no longer build your identity around having none. You stop needing to be the one who sees through everything. Because sometimes, seeing through everything is just another way to stay untouchable, to stay distant, to stay safe. But you are not here to float above belief forever. You are here to engage, to choose, to risk caring about something, to build, even knowing it might collapse, to speak, even if the words are flawed. So, when the belief trap appears, when the part of you whispers, beliefs are lies, walk away, ask it a question. Who is speaking? Because that voice is a belief too. It wears the mask of wisdom, of clarity, of freedom, but it's still speaking from a center that's afraid to be wrong, afraid to need, afraid to belong. And that's okay. There's no shame in falling into this trap. We all do. The path out is not to fight the trap, but to see it, to name it, to smile at it, and then to keep walking anyway. You don't need to believe in nothing to be free. You just need to stop building your identity from anything that cannot be questioned. Because in the end, it's not about being belief-free. It's about being belief-aware, so you can step forward, not with perfect truth, but with open eyes, holding your beliefs like lanterns, not prisons, willing to change, willing to care, willing to believe just enough to act. Because maybe the real trap isn't belief. Maybe it's the fear of ever holding one again. Consciousness is the prison. You woke up to escape. You opened your eyes because you believed truth would set you free. You searched for clarity, for awareness, for some higher perspective that could finally explain everything. Your thoughts, your fears, your patterns, this world. You wanted enlightenment, or at least a way out of the confusion. And for a moment, you got it. You saw behind the curtain. You glimpsed the machine. You realized how much of your life had been lived on autopilot, how many of your choices weren't really yours. You felt something shift. But no one tells you what happens next, because now you can't go back. You can't unsee what you saw. You can't unknow what you know. And the freedom you were chasing, it came with a cost. Because now you see the strings, but you're still inside the puppet. Now you hear the hum of the system, but you still have to live in it. Now you recognize the illusion, but you're trapped in the theater, watching the show repeat with no exit sign in sight. This is the cruel paradox. Consciousness is the prison. You thought awakening would be the key, but it was the lock. You thought awareness would liberate you, but it made the bars visible. Because now, every moment is layered. Every action has commentary. You can't eat without knowing why you crave the food. You can't speak without hearing the voice behind the voice. You watch yourself perform. You analyze your motivations. You see your trauma in real time, playing out like a script you didn't write, but can't stop performing. And yet, you keep going, because what else is there? Even your joy is filtered now. Even your peace comes with observation. You sit in silence and notice your thoughts. You notice the one who notices. You're a mirror reflecting a mirror reflecting a mirror, and nowhere in the loop is there escape. You live inside the watcher, and the watcher never sleeps. You wanted to become more human, but now you feel like a surveillance system watching your own life. You are no longer just being. You are constantly aware of being, and that awareness is heavy. It hums at the edge of everything. You feel it when you laugh. You feel it when you cry. You feel it when you lie awake at 3 a.m. asking, wasn't this supposed to help? And here's the truth nobody tells you. Awakening isn't comforting. It isn't a warm light or a blissful float above suffering. It's sharp, cold, inevitable. It strips away your illusions but doesn't replace them with answers. It hands you a mirror, not a map. And you begin to realize that knowing is not the same as escaping. Seeing the bars doesn't melt them. It just means you're now aware of how small the room really is. You start to notice how consciousness itself never stops. It's always scanning, always noticing, always layering narrative onto the present. Even your moments of presence are framed by the knowledge that you're being present. There is no raw experience anymore, only processed frames, interpreted signals, endless self-reflection. You thought you were climbing out of the maze, But you were just ascending into a more complicated one, made not of walls, but of awareness. And yet, here's the cruelest part of all. You wouldn't trade it. You wouldn't go back. Not really. Because even though consciousness is the prison, it's also the only proof you're alive. It's the ache that makes beauty possible. It's the weight that gives depth to every moment. It's the observer that, while cursed to never stop watching, is also the only part of you that can truly see. Yes, you're locked in. Yes, you can't unawaken. But you can still move. You can still create. You can still weep. You can still laugh while knowing it's absurd. You can still love, even though you know how fragile it is. Even though you know it might break. Even though you see the machinery underneath it all. You can still choose to care. Not because it frees you, but because it means something even while you're not free. So maybe the answer was never to escape. Maybe the real awakening is realizing that the prison is part of the path, that you walk through life not to be unburdened, but to carry it all with clarity. And in that clarity, in that raw, unfiltered awareness, you find something that isn't freedom, but something deeper. You find presence. Not the kind sold in books or whispered in mantras, but the kind earned when you stop running, when you sit with the watcher, when you live not in spite of the bars, but inside them, awake, fully, painfully, beautifully awake.